Welcome to Classic Trials. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we make sense of the law one bite at a time. In this series, we observe and analyze the play-by-play of some of the biggest trials that have shaped the public consciousness of the American judicial system. In this season, we're working our way through the case of California v. Erik and Lyle Menendez. Growing up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then Beverly Hills, California, these young men had everything they could ever want, or so it seemed, until one night on August 20th, 1989, they approached Jose and Kitty Menendez with newly purchased shotguns. Put on trial for murdering their own parents, they claimed self-defense, arguing they were terrorized in their own home by abusive parents until they could take no more. Which argument is more convincing? Come join and see for yourself. Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful Monday because it's another Menendez Monday. It's another Menendez Monday. That's about the extent of the cringe for this episode. But I hope you guys are doing well. Love to see all the folks in the chat that are hanging out and talking about all kinds of stuff. Love it, love it. Love to see all of it. So I'm excited to see you guys here. For one thing is, today's date is always a bit of a somber day. I feel like I have to at least mention it. It is another anniversary of 9/11. It's been 22 years now, which is crazy. A year ago, I had a live stream where we kind of chatted with a few folks in LawTube. I think it was a year ago, or was it 2 years ago? I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, it was just to kind of chat about it and everything. It's wild. It's wild. So I don't know if you are of the type. I mean, Mr. Bites and I, we usually end up watching something on 9/11 that is just to remind us of, like, some of the footage from the day, some of the news from the day, just to remind ourselves of what happened on that day, because it was a very important day. It shaped our, like, with things that happened in America and around the world from then on. It really, it's like we've been talking in recent years about how we live in, like, the pre-COVID world and then post-COVID world, how things really kind of changed quite a bit. 9/11 was obviously another one of those dates that was so incredibly important for our history. So just wanted to acknowledge that. If any of you are you've got someone who was somehow impacted by it. I mean, obviously there's the day itself, folks that died or survived, or had health issues afterwards, or folks that went to war afterwards as a result. That's one of the ways in which my family was impacted several times over. And we've got plenty of, obviously, with Mr. Bites being in the military, we've got plenty of friends that have gone through, even some of the hardest aspects of war. So just wanted to acknowledge that, and just kind of talk about it briefly. But obviously that's not what today is about, what this live stream is about. It's about the Menendez trial. So now that we talked about it just a little bit, I hope that everyone is having a good day, all things considered. And with that, we will be moving on into part 5 of the Menendez case. Well, part 5 of specifically Lyle's testimony. Today we are going to be finishing up his direct testimony. It's going to take up the entire I remember last week I was like, oh yeah, we'll probably get into cross-examination today. No, not at all. Not even a little bit. So cross-examination is going to start next week in episode 38. This is episode 37. Can you believe we've been doing this for like almost a year now? And Melissa Simak, thank you so much for the compliment on the flannel. I decided, today I noticed that there's been a little bit of a break in the temperature. And so I was like, it feels a little bit more like fall. I went for a run this morning. I was wearing shorts and a tank top, and it was almost a little bit chilly with that. So I was like, yeah, like we're starting to move into flannel season, I think. So I figured I would bring out the OG Classic Trials garb, also known as Mr. Bite's flannel closet. He's got a little bit of a collection, half of which, probably actually more than half of which, was given to him by me anyway. So, I'm just basically, it's the wife tax. It's the wife tax. That's fine. And he's totally fine with it. But anyway, so yeah. So let's get let's get into it. But thank you, Melissa, for the compliment on that. We are continuing to feel more and more fall like as the weeks go by. Um, all right. All right. So let's get into it. I mean, I don't before we actually talk about the testimony, we've got 2.5 hours of testimony today. So 2.5, maybe more like two-ish, I think, actually. No. It's about 2.5 hours. And we've already gone through so much here. We've gone through his childhood abuse. We've gone through, his college experience with his father kind of just dropping in, Jose just sort of dropping in every once in a while and just sort of finding out, like random things about his life, like immediately. Obviously even though he's on the other side of the country, he's got his dad's got a long reach. Let's put it that way. His parents, both of them. It sounds like he was also uh telling a lot of things to his Aunt Terry, who he was very close with, but while realizing that she was probably telling everything to his mother, Kitty. So, there's a lot that was in that. At the same time, we also heard about how he learned about Erik's abuse. Initially in childhood, he had heard about that, and he told his father not to abuse him anymore. His father said okay, which I still don't know how I feel about that one, like how convincing that piece is to me. I don't know why. I'm not sure why. I can't really put my finger on it, but for some reason that piece for some reason just kind of like sticks out a little bit to me. But regardless, the second time around, so he thinks that he's able to sort of like, he says that he thinks that he's able to have like the same sort of conversation with him, and it goes horribly wrong, and basically everything sort of blows up. And last week we heard about how things led from that conversation, from when he decided to confront his father about abusing Erik, and how that led them to think that their lives were imminently in danger. They thought that their lives were over, that their parents were planning to unalive them. We'll use that phrase. And so that fed into what they said that was their basically panic, and what ended up leading to them getting a couple shotguns and then ultimately taking their parents' lives. I I'm getting the sincerity on how they thought, or at least, from Lyle. Obviously we still have to hear from Erik, but we have hearing from Lyle, I think that I'm getting the sincerity from him about the belief in their life being in danger, their lives being in danger. Whether or not that's reasonable is another issue, but that's how you take it from murder to voluntary manslaughter. It could be a mistaken but sincere belief that they needed to use that amount of force for self-protection. And that's seemingly what they were trying to go for here. So anyway, okay. All right. So what in the heck are we going to get into this time? Now that we've already gone through the nitty gritty, it seems like what else is there? Obviously there's 2.5 hours worth of stuff. I'm wondering, I mean, we're probably going to get into, actually, I'll answer my own question. We're probably going to get into, what happened after the parents' deaths, after they killed the parents, with money, with purchases, with, all of this, because they have to address it since the prosecution has been hammering on it so much. And it's so crucial to the prosecution's case in chief and their argument that oh, they killed them for the money. So we need to hear from Lyle, testimony that is talking about the money, talking about purchases that he made, talking about conversations that he had with Erik maybe about money, and and talking about all of these things to show like these things happened, yes, but they are not why they killed their parents. They didn't kill them so that they could make these purchases. They didn't kill them so that they could, so that's what I anticipate we will be getting into in this one. Also, Laura Cox, I saw earlier, I think I saw in the chat, you said that you're going to be an auntie. That's so exciting. Very, very exciting. Congratulations. And I love it. I love being an aunt is like the best thing ever. So congrats. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, joyous journey with that. Just wanted to mention that before I get started. Okay. Just want to make sure that I've got everything going on. Got everything covered. Okay, let's get to it. All right. As always, let me know if there's any sort of sound balance issues, and I will adjust. Thanks.
Menendez is on the witness stand. You're still under oath. Would you state your name for the record, please?
Joseph Lyle Menendez.
And you may continue your direct examination.
Thank you. Mr. Menendez, after your parents died, did your relatives start arriving in town?
Yes.
And where do most of your relatives live?
New Jersey. Awesome.
And some live in other states?
Florida and a few other states. Arizona.
And did they stay in the same location you stayed?
We all stayed at the Lodge Hotel at first.
Okay. And did you move to some other location?
And then we moved to the Bel Air Hotel.
Did all of your relatives move, or just you and your brother move?
I don't think, just my brother and I moved, and where the family would meet and sort of gather sort of changed to that hotel. But I think they still had the rooms they reserved at the Bel Air, pretty sure.
And who made the decision that you should go to the Bel Air Hotel?
One of my dad's cousins.
And why did he want you to stay there?
I believe he thought it was more secure and more conducive to open family gatherings, since they did have a large room kind of separated from the other guests.
And several days after your relatives arrived, did you have a conversation with your Aunt Marta?
Yes.
And what is her relationship? She's your aunt. Whose sister is she?
My dad's sister.
And did that conversation concern the financial aspect of your mother and father's situation?
Yes.
And where did that conversation take place?
That took place at one of the hotels. I'm not sure if it was her room or my room.
Was she discussing the size of your parents' estate?
Yes, she had a whole list of papers and things to show us.
And did that discussion also concern whether there was any insurance?
Yes.
Now, when your Aunt Marta was telling you about the information about the estate, did you make any comment to her with regard to the will?
Yes, we told her.
Sustain.
What did you say?
Sustain.
Before your parents died, what did you believe with regard to whether you were in or out of the will?
We were out of the will.
And how is it that you came to believe that?
That's what my dad told me, that I was out of the will.
Did he explain to you why?
No, but I sort of realized it. He mentioned it every so often, and I realized it as we went along.
Why did you think you were? This is just something that you figured out on your own. Something you.
No,
believe?
this was things that he would say about my girlfriends and my girlfriend situations led me to believe he just didn't want them to get his money. And so I didn't see it as a permanent situation just until he felt that I married properly.
And did he have more than one discussion with you about being out of the will?
There weren't really discussions. My dad would just say that if he was sarcastic and maybe even angry.
And over what period of time had he been telling you that you were out of the will, if you remember?
Since the beginning of '89, maybe even a little before.
And did you express this state of?
Just a side note, I'm sure this is a conversation for many wealthy families. And I know this because I've gotten a bit of a window into it in my work with trust and estates, both litigation side and estate planning side. That, well, and not even necessarily wealthy people, but sometimes a parent has a kid that has a certain behavior or is engaged in a certain lifestyle that they don't necessarily want. And excuse me, you want more Treatos? Of course you do. So, and the parent will say, they'll put into their will, let's say they have a kid that has a problem with, drug and alcohol abuse. And they'll say, so if by the time they have reached, a certain age and they still have, alcohol, and drug and alcohol, addiction issues, they are disinherited from the, the estate. There are ways to write that into a will that don't necessarily, write them out outright, but it'll attach conditions to it. Maybe they'll say, create a sub trust for this person and just, let it accrue until they get to a certain age. And at that point, if they've, overcome that addiction, then they can have the money. But if they haven't, then no, it goes to everybody else that is a beneficiary. There are ways of writing that. And that would have been the case in the late 80s, early 90s as well. So, there are ways for Jose and Kitty to have written that if they think that Lyle and Erik are engaging in these relationships that they disapprove of, that they're worried about them ending up with some woman who is a gold digger. There are all kinds of ways for them to write all of that, put all of those kinds of conditions in there. Now, they could have 100% had that in a will and then still said, you're out of the estate, you're out of the will, the trust, what have you. Jose could have still definitely expressed that to Lyle to say, like, hey, you keep dating these girls that I don't like. And so long as you keep doing that, I don't want to give you anything from the estate when I die. I can definitely understand that. I would say that at first when he said that he understood that he had been written out of the will, I mean, yeah, I would say that would help his case more than anything. Because if you've been written out of the will and that the will, or you figure that the will exists someplace, someone who wanted to, unalive someone for, their money would want to make sure first that they are in their estate, listed as a beneficiary there. So if he has that belief that he was not in the will at the point or in the trust document, what have you, honestly, I think that helps his case. And particularly if it's because, this is something that they had been out of the will for a while, because he says that his father's been making these, he's been making these comments about him and his girlfriends and all of that kind of stuff for some time, and basically making those kind of comments about him being out of the will because of that, then the timing issue of like using that as some kind of a trigger for a reason to kill their parents also doesn't fit. That timing doesn't fit for me. But I am also willing to entertain other perspectives on this. You know, if anybody has a different perspective, let me know in the chat or in the comments if you're watching on replay.
Of mind to your aunt?
Yes.
And did your aunt tell you something about an insurance policy with the company, with your dad's company? State of mind again, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Did you have any information before your parents died with regard to a $5 million insurance policy that your father's company was to pay for him?
Yes.
And how is it that you had information about that policy?
Just through things that were said in the house. Mostly my mother arguing with him about the appointments that he continued to miss or cancel.
What did you believe about the $5 million insurance policy? Did you believe that it was in effect or not
At what time?
prior to your parents' death?
It wasn't in effect because he hadn't taken the physical.
And were there discussions in your home about why he hadn't taken the physical?
Yes.
And what were the reasons stated that why he hadn't taken the physical? State of mind again, Your Honor.
Can you spell out what time frame you're talking about in these conversations, please?
Did your father have some health problems in January of 1989?
Yes.
What kind of health problems did he have?
He had some, I don't know if I'm using the right words, but heart palpitations of some sort in the night. And so to be safe, he checked into a hospital near Pico Boulevard. And I found out, I believe the next day, which was Super Bowl, I guess Super Bowl Sunday. And so I was with some friends at the house, and then I left because I found out my dad was in the hospital. And I went and I spent the Super Bowl with him, and it was some sort of a heart trouble, which he was keeping secret.
Did he express to you why he wanted to keep it secret?
Yes, because
State of mind again, Your Honor.
All right, it's not received for the truth of what was said, just to reflect the state of mind of the witness. And again, could you specify when this occurred?
After your father had these heart problems and was in the hospital, were you given some instructions with regard to whether this was to be talked about openly or not?
yes, he was extremely concerned that it would get out that he may have some heart trouble, and the stock would drop in his company significantly since the whole house of cards was held up by him, he felt. And were they to find out that the chairman, chief executive, had health problems, the stock would drop. And so I believe nobody at his company knew, maybe his secretary and just myself and Mom, Erik.
And was there any connection between these heart problems and him getting the insurance policy?
Yes, the only connection was that he felt that he wanted to give as much time as he could, a little more time. I guess they wanted him to take the physical in the spring when he was supposed to take it for the insurance policy. And he was putting it off and just wanted to let as much time go by as he could.
Is this what he was saying to you?
This is what he was saying to my mother when she was really pretty obsessively badgering her about the appointments that he was missing, and that I guess someone at the company was setting up for him, and he just wouldn't go.
So this was a topic of conversation on more than one occasion between your mother and father?
Yes.
And when your mother would talk to him about taking the physical and urging him to do so, would he use the health thing as a reason for not doing it? Or?
Yes. And he was a little suspicious of her.
How do you mean he was a little suspicious of her?
Because she was so insistent that he take the physical, and, she was unstable. And he was sarcastically implying that maybe, he was just, seemed to be implying that maybe he shouldn't take the physical if she wanted him to take the physical so bad.
Sort of joking with her about it?
Yeah.
And after your father died, did your Aunt Marta suggest to you that you should be able to get this insurance? That the company should pay off on this policy?
Yeah, she said she was the one that arranged the insurance. Oh, you mean the $5 million?
Right.
She didn't seem to understand what I was trying to explain to her. She seemed to feel that the company should pay it anyway, since she said it was in the contract. Even though he didn't take the physical, who cares? He would have passed, and she should get it. So I told her I didn't think so.
So did she then continue negotiations with the company with regard to that?
Yes.
Lack of foundation.
Sustained, the answer stricken.
Did she report back to you that she was still attempting to get the company to pay off on that policy?
Yes.
And did she tell you about another insurance policy? One that she'd written for your dad?
Yes.
And did you know about that one before your parents died?
No.
And do you know what the amount was on that one?
Fine.
Sustained.
After your parents died, did your Aunt Marta tell you how much that insurance policy was?
She did.
And how much was it?
I believe it was, between my brother and myself, a total of $650,000, I believe.
And had you ever heard about that policy before their death?
No.
You said that you believed that you were out of the will when your parents died. Is that correct?
Right.
Did your relatives find a will for your parents?
Yes, they did.
And was it a new will or one that had been made up some time ago?
No, it wasn't. Over 10 years old, I believe.
And did they continue looking for a newer will?
Yes, they also believed that there could be a new will, and so we were looking for a new will.
At some point, did you receive some information about some information in a computer that seemed to relate to a will?
Did I find some information?
Did you receive some? Did somebody tell you about
Yes.
that? And was this computer in your parents' bedroom?
That was my mother's IBM computer.
And did you have a computer of your own in the house?
Yes.
And what kind of computer did you have?
That was a Macintosh that I had bought at Princeton.
And when you bought the Macintosh at Princeton, who used it primarily?
Mostly my friends used it. It pretty much didn't get used, actually. But if someone wanted to do a paper and they knew how to use it, it was fine with me.
And did you ever use the IBM computer that was in your parents' bedroom?
I didn't know how to use it because you need to know the special. It seemed complicated.
Did your dad use it?
No, he didn't know how to use it either.
Who used it?
Mom had some knowledge on how to use it. Not a whole lot, but she was able to do some work with it.
And did you receive some information while you were still in California about efforts to pull information out of the computer, out of the IBM computer?
Yes.
The biggest time.
All right, one step at a time. Objection overruled. Yes, we'll step.
Yes.
And your parents died on Sunday, is that correct?
Yes.
And when did you leave for New Jersey?
Friday, I believe.
between that Friday, which was the 20th, that Sunday, which was the 20th, and the following Friday, is that when you received information about what was in the computer?
Yes.
And what information did you receive? What information did you have about who was looking in the computer?
A bunch of my relatives, I know Carlos Baralt, the executor, was looking and was working on the computer. My Aunt Joan, my Aunt Pat, I believe my Aunt Terry, and a cousin of my dad's, Carlos Menendez. And there may have been probably my Uncle Brian also, actually. There may have been more, but I don't know.
So everybody was,
I spent a few hours checking all the files and going through it.
and were you given some information in terms of what they were able to find in the computer?
Yes.
And what were you told?
Objection, hearsay.
State of mind again, Your Honor.
Could you be a little more specific as to when and where and who said this?
Between the Sunday your parents died and the Friday that you left for New Jersey, did you receive some information with regard to what your relatives had found in the computer?
Yes.
And do you remember exactly when that was?
That was during family discussions we had after they had looked through the computer, which was, I think it was later in the week, but it could have been as early as Wednesday. I'm not sure.
And did you receive this information when you were sitting with a group of people, or was it just one person talking to you?
It was just a group of people, and especially Carlos Menendez had a big interest. And, everybody had worked on it, the computer, and so it was being talked about, and I was there.
And what did they say about what they found in the computer?
That they had found basically that there was nothing in the computer of any interest other than these 3 entries.
And what were the 3 entries, if you remember?
My memory is it was Menendez, and then the word will, and then the word list.
And were these 3 entries the focal point of the interest of the relatives in terms of spending all of the time trying to get the information out of the computer?
That's what they were basically talking about, was those 3 entries, yeah.
And what did they tell you about those entries?
Just that they had found the 3 entries. At least those were the ones that they were discussing, and that there was nothing in the entries, that they had pulled up the files, and that they were basically completely empty. And it seemed like somebody at one point had been doing something with those entries, and I guess had either erased it or something had happened, because there were just like very little bytes under the entries.
All right, this conversation, again, is not received for the truth of the matter stated, just to reflect the state of mind of the witness.
Thank you.
Yep.
Was any discussion about whether, if there was a will in the computer, it would be a valid will?
Yes.
And this was still in California prior to you returning to New Jersey on Friday?
Yes.
And what was that discussion with regard to the validity of the will?
That was essentially, I was just listening mostly to Carlos Baralt, who was the executor. He was the only one handling the affairs of the estate. And it was, he said that a will on a computer would not be valid whether they found one or not. And he said because there had to be a signature and witnesses, and that it was, basically he said that it was interesting, but that he wasn't going to waste any more time on it. And
Were some arrangements made for someone else to see if they could retrieve the information?
yes,
Okay, and were those arrangements made? while you were still in California or after you went to New Jersey, or do you know?
I'm not sure exactly when.
And what arrangements were you aware of at that time?
Well, really shortly after that, either in California or right when they got back, I believe. Somebody wanted an expert to check the computer more thoroughly, and it was Eileen's responsibility. She's a cousin of mine who works with IBM, to find somebody. She lives in New Jersey, but to find somebody in California who could come out inexpensively and just double check the computer, I guess.
Did you make any efforts before you left California to find out what was in the computer?
No.
And when you found out that Eileen was going to make some arrangements, did you talk to her about it or ask to be present?
No, I found out about the arrangements all in, I believe, the same conversation in New Jersey.
Okay.
And I don't know if the arrangements were made in California, but I found out about them in New Jersey.
And how is it that you found out that Eileen was going to have somebody come and look at the computer? Was
There
it a
was-
discussion just with you and Eileen, or were there other people around?
No, there were, I believe we were at my Aunt Terry's house, and there was a big, Eileen was very upset, and there was a big problem, and we were basic discussion about the fact how upset Eileen was that she had set up somebody to go look at the computer, and my dad's cousin had, behind her back, set up his own expert to look through the computer. And she had gone through all this trouble, and why was he doing that? And that's where I learned it for the first time.
And what's your dad's cousin's name?
Carlos Menendez.
And so was this a fairly big event in terms of her being upset? Was she making a
It's
big
fairly
deal of it?
big. My Aunt Terry and my Uncle Carlos, they were both the executors, actually, stayed out of it completely because it was more a personal thing than anything that had to do with the estate.
Being personal in terms of Eileen being
Here's a question that I have. Well, okay, maybe he's working off of the will that they did find that was from 10 years prior. I just had this thought that I was like, how does he know that that his uncle Carlos was the executor, that his Aunt Terry was the co-executor? How did they know that? That would be written in the will. But I guess, he could be going off of the 10-year-old document, which, by the way, a will or a trust document being 10 years old, the age of it doesn't make it any less valid. So what they are looking for is for another one that potentially modifies it, which is understandable. Because, the recommendation, generally speaking, is anytime you have a major life event, including moving to a new state, you should have new estate documents drawn up. Whether you get married or divorced, or you have a kid, or, one of your, your trustee or your executor or any of your backup people, because usually you've got to have backups. If any of them pass away, that kind of stuff, you want to revisit it and update it from time to time. So, so it's understandable that they were searching for a more recent one to see if it modified the terms at all. This is a very diligent search for a will. And it seems like any family would be wanting to do this under these circumstances. To me, it's not at all suspect that they are searching for a will or searching for a trust in this computer, in this, in any of this stuff. Now, my only question was searching for it in the computer, which every time I say that in my brain, I hear Zoolander. It's in the computer. Is the type of documents that you had in computers in those days. I know that like a Mac in that day is so different from the Mac that I am working off of right now. Very, very different. So, right now I can pull up any kind of PDF of anything that's a brilliant scan of any kind of a document. Generally speaking, you would like to digitally save a lot of your important documents just in case anything happens to the physical copy of it. It's a good idea to do that. And, nowadays when you pull that up, you have a beautiful copy of the original. In those days, what would that look like? Were they able to save PDFs to it? Were they able, like these kinds of things are I'm not well versed enough in technology today, let alone the technology of 1989, to know whether or not that's all kind of like a quixotic, voyage that they're going on and trying to find this thing in the computer. Again, in the computer. Now, I will say there was a question earlier, and I'm saving a bunch of questions here. I just want to answer this one, and I'll get to all the rest at some point. But here's a good question, just because asked, is okay, but Jose and Kitty wouldn't have the wills held with an attorney. The answer to that is no. So when you get your estate documents done, which I recommend for, basically everyone, some level of estate documents, a whole package of it. Not legal advice, but just general life advice. It's a good idea for everybody to have that. Usually what an estate planning attorney will tell you is, when they actually do finalize the package is, and they give it to you for signatures, you take the originals home, and they'll say, the attorney might say, this is up to whatever practices of that particular firm. But commonly what I've seen is the attorney will say, we will keep copies for up to 5 years. And that's it. At that point, after 5 years, we are going to destroy all copies that we have, because otherwise it's a lot of paper to be keeping in your, in your firm, in your office. And there could also be some liability with that. And, so it's, that's a common practice, is to say after 5 years, all copies will be destroyed. So if you want any copies of anything, get them within a certain amount of time. And this is, by the way, is not just estate planning attorneys. This is also in litigation practices where, the firm will usually say, we're going to keep your information for a certain amount of time. Ask for copies of the discovery of this and that, of, whatever, what you would like to have if you don't already have it. Within that period of time, after that point, we're going to destroy it, and you won't be able to get it afterwards. So it's a common practice, but the originals will be going with the client. The client is going to have them. And the instruction is always keep it in a safe place, keep it secret, keep it safe. We are really going with the movie quotes today here. We got Zoolander, we got Lord of the Rings. But like keep it locked away in a place that is ideally fire safe, water safe. It's not going to get destroyed by some kind of, home emergency. Dog's not going to get to it to tear it to shreds, any of that kind of stuff. So that's usually the recommendation. So generally speaking, it will be with the client. But that's a good question. But in a follow-up, good to know, the attorney should know if a new will was written, though, right? Not necessarily. Sometimes you'll someone will decide, hey, that attorney was great, but I want to go with someone else. Or if they moved to a new state, like the Menendezes did, if it was 10 years prior, it sounds like they had those estate documents drafted on the East Coast in New Jersey. They don't have to notify the New Jersey attorney that they, are updating. They don't have to do anything with the old attorney at all. So they would be working with a California attorney, since they had moved to California then. So it's the attorney doesn't necessarily know that any of that exists. So this can be a big concern for a lot of families, is looking for the will, looking for the trust document, looking for, all of these documents, within a certain period of time. It's not at all fishy to me that they wanted to get to that as quickly as possible and to figure that out as quickly as possible. There are some people that would be turned off by the family quickly, like moving to that, but I'm not turned off by it at all, because I've seen all kinds of different grief responses by people where, some people just want to sit in it for a while and not move on anything. And then other people just want to get to administering the estate as quickly as possible. So yeah. So anyways, that's all of that. Okay. Yes. Yeah. You're welcome, just because. And also other, like I said before, other questions I am saving. I will be pulling them up and answering them as we go along. But I want to continue with this testimony.
Being angry that
Right.
this had happened. And after you found out that Carlos Menendez had made some arrangements with regard to the will, did you do anything with regard to the computer? Excuse me, with regard to the computer. Did you do anything?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, once I found out that Carlos had hired his own expert, I wanted to know why, and I was suspicious. So I believe I called my brother first, and talked to him about it briefly just to see if he knew anything. And he said, basically just verified that Carlos had his own expert set up to come that Friday. And I think this was a Wednesday. And that Friday, and that Erik was going to be there and let him in the house.
Was that a surprise to you?
Well, at that point, I knew from Eileen that that's basically what I had heard, but I got the details, I think, from Erik, and certainly a surprise to me. The whole thing was a surprise to me, actually.
And what did you think about it?
I thought that Carlos was maybe, up to something, was suspicious. I had known that my father didn't trust him, and I really didn't trust him. I didn't have anything against him, I just didn't know. So
What did you think he might do?
Also, this is an interesting point, is I didn't trust Carlos because I knew that my father didn't trust him. There could be all kinds of reasons why Jose didn't trust Carlos. It could have been because Carlos was legitimately like sniffing around his money, and trying to use him for business or things like that. Or it could be that Jose didn't trust Carlos because he saw Carlos punch Lyle in the chest when he was a kid. Or was it Erik? I think it was Lyle. That he had happened to see him physically assaulting his son in the privacy of his bedroom. But what's interesting is, with these, I want to bring myself up a little bigger here, but with these topics of family abuse, this is a more recent conversation too, with the whole 8 passengers topic that has come up. If you're familiar, or if you're not familiar, I'm talking about Ruby Franke in Utah. She had the channel 8 Passengers. It was about her and her husband and their 6 kids in Utah. She, was this basically like it was a family vlog. And she had put herself out there as sort of a parenting vlogger, kind of giving advice on parenting and all that kind of stuff. She was recently arrested for, I think it was like 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, because which was triggered when one of her kids had gone to a neighbor asking for food and water and was severely malnourished. That kid and a sibling were hospitalized because of severe malnourishment. And there's this question that comes up in these kinds of topics, which is like, why doesn't the family do something? Why isn't the family getting involved? Why isn't, and we've heard a bit, so far already on all kinds of like the ways that the parent can be very private about things, can also, manipulate things in a lot of different ways. But then there's also where the other family members kind of know that something is going on and are trying to do something about it. There's this issue of trust, and that parent that is abusing their kids. And by the way, I just, so that, for anyone that's unfamiliar, Ruby Franke is like, there's no SA allegations in there. So that's not, it's not exactly a one-to-one situation with the Menendezes, but, I want to make that clear for anybody that is unfamiliar. But there is this topic, and I'm, this is not to let the aunts and uncles of the kids, off, because a lot of people are very upset with Ruby Franke's adult siblings that are also, I guess, social media influencers as well. So a lot of people are upset at them, and for all kinds of reasons. But one of the interesting dynamics that we're talking about here, that Lyle is talking about, is this lack of trust within the family. When there is abuse like this going on, there's going to be some sort of manipulation along the way of, creating some tension in the relationship between their kids and extended family. So this is very interesting that his relationship with his father changed in an instant, basically, is what he said, is with that conversation when he tried to approach Jose talking about the abuse of Erik that was still ongoing, that was the moment that everything changed for him with his father. But here, he still had it ingrained in him from his father not to trust Carlos because of the fact that that Jose didn't trust him. And it could be also that there are a lot of ways that families that don't work, that are dysfunctional, there could be all kinds of ways that they, that they are dysfunctional in a lot of different directions as well. So keep that in mind. Oh, don't confuse the Carloses. Didn't we hear from Carlos Beralt? Lyle is here talking about Carlos Menendez here, not Carlos B. Oh, okay. I might be confusing the two then. So folks in the chat, straighten me out. Which Carlos is which? Because I'm pretty sure we heard from Carlos Beralt previously, but we're gonna hear from Carlos Menendez, and Carlos Menendez is the executor. Oh, Carlos Beralt hasn't testified yet. What in the heck? Okay. So, all right, then I'm a little bit confused. Oh, we heard from Peter Cano. Okay. Thank you. We heard from Teresa Beralt. Okay. So I'm starting to mix these folks up. Oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you guys. Thank you. Carlos Menendez never testifies. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Helping to straighten out the brain here. Okay. All right. Let's continue on.
Well, I thought he might create something on the computer that would, I wasn't sure what he was going to do, whether he was going to try and write a will that wrote himself in or cause problems in some way like that. I wasn't sure what his intentions were. But I figured if he hired his own person after Eileen went through all this trouble and went through my brother, which I thought was not proper, he should have gotten the executor's permission to go to the house to look through my mother's computer, or at least got both our permission, and he didn't do that. So I thought something might be going on.
So did you fly to California?
Yes.
And did you hire Mr. Whitkin?
Yes.
And did you do what the receipt indicates, which is to ask him to recover files on a hard drive?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 64. Do you recognize this?
I believe so. It's the receipt from Howard.
Yeah. When he came to the house, did you let him in to look at the computer?
Yes.
And did you stay with him the whole time that he was pulling up whatever information was on the computer?
Not the whole time.
And did he tell you that there was anything in there? Did he tell you if there was anything in there?
He said that there was nothing in there. But just, there were computer-related things, but nothing that he could see that was personal or of any interest.
Did you ask him to erase whatever was on there?
I did. I asked him to erase it.
Did you ask him to erase it in a way that supposedly nobody could tell if it had been erased?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
I wanted him to erase it in a way that it would just look pretty much like nobody had been there at all, actually like nobody had been there at all if he could. And then I would, when Carlos's expert came the next day, I would see what he was up to. And if he came back and said, you know, there was this, I found this on the computer, a letter from your dad saying that I should get this, or what, you know, I wasn't sure, but then I would know that it wasn't true. And he said he felt he could erase it in a way that nobody would find out. So I told him to do that.
And did you subsequently have a discussion with Carlos Menendez about this whole situation?
Yes.
And did you express to him what your concerns had been?
Yes, he was angry that I had done that, and I was angry that he had sort of gone behind Eileen's back and through my brother and not consulted Carlos and I, and it was suspicious, and we had a discussion about it, and you know, I think we understood each other.
Your Honor, the next section I have is only in front of the Lyle Menendez jury. It's fairly brief, so
Okay, you can do it by noon hour?
I think I can.
Okay.
All right, and at this point, what we'll do is have the blue jury take an early break for lunch and come back at 1:30. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. Don't speculate as to what is going on in court while you're not here. You must make your decision based only on the evidence presented to you. Yes.
This section and the next section are only for Lyle Menendez's jury, so maybe if they came back a half hour later, we would be able to cover both of
Oh,
the sections.
okay. All right, then we'll change that and excuse you until 2 o'clock, and we'll see the blue jury back here at 2 o'clock. All right, the blue jury is left. You may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Menendez, did you spend a lot of money before your parents died?
Yes.
Did you spend significantly more money after your parents died?
Yes.
And did you buy 3 Rolex watches
Yes.
and a Porsche?
Yes.
Did you spend a lot of money on clothes?
Yes.
Your parents were in the process of buying you a condominium at the time they died. Is that correct?
Right.
Did you make an offer on another condominium that was right nearby?
Yes.
And why were you going to buy? Did you actually make offers on 2 other condominiums?
Yes.
And why were you going to buy those 2 other condominiums?
Well, actually, the one was a condominium, and one was like a much larger place, like
Okay.
more like a patio home.
Okay.
And
What was your thought when you made the offer on the condominium?
well, I was going to go to Princeton, and the condominium that my parents bought was for that purpose. And we were really trying hard to get my brother into Princeton for that fall semester. And my Aunt Marta was arranging things, and everybody was trying to meet with the Princeton people. And I
Who
met
was
with,
that condominium going to be for?
that was for Erik.
And when you decided to make the offer on the patio home, who was going to live in that patio home?
Well, I wasn't sure if Erik was going to be able to get in. And it turned out that they wouldn't let him in for that semester. And in the event that he didn't get in, I wanted to make an offer on this patio home, because then he was going to maybe play tennis then at that point and travel. And I wanted a place big enough for, I was going to be living in Princeton, and big enough for he and his coach, when they came into town, that they could stay in the house with me rather than have these, maintain a separate condominium when he would be just flying in every once in a while.
Did you ever end up buying either one of those?
No.
And the one that did close was the one that your parents were in the process of buying when they died, is that
Right,
correct?
I finished the sale of that one.
And did you also borrow money from the estate to buy a restaurant?
Yes.
And when was that?
The restaurant was purchased at the end of January.
Why did you buy that? Or why did you invest in that?
Basically, I was just very unsure as to what was going on in my life at that point, whether I wanted to go back to school, since I wasn't able to start the first semester, whether I wanted to come in midterm, or whether I was going to go on the tour and play with Erik. And there was expectations of that. And I was sort of all over the place. And in talking with my uncles, basically this feeling that I should do something and focus on something. And I picked that.
Do you today have any of the watches?
No.
Do you have the Porsche?
No.
Do you own any condos?
No.
What happened to the restaurant?
Just gave it back to the person I bought it for.
After your parents died, you hired bodyguards.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Right.
Where was it that you first saw bodyguards after your parents died?
First saw bodyguards, the company hired them to guard the Beverly Hills house.
What did you think about that?
That they had that they knew about my dad's connections or had more details as to my dad's connections, and had some concern that somebody might want to go back to the house to get something. So they were protecting the house pretty vigorously. I mean, the guards were armed and so on.
And did you hire bodyguards after that, after seeing the guards at the house, or before?
No, once I saw the series of things, once I saw the guards at the house, and from watching TV programs, I got nervous and just decided to hire some guards.
What about the TV programs that you watched made you nervous?
Well, there was just program after program about my dad's having mafia connections, and that why this could be a mafia hit. And, I remember seeing it could have been a hard copy or one of those shows about this mafia family and where my dad might have fit in, and the different things I knew about his business deals in the past that were shady, and just programs like that. And it just made me nervous. And then there was the release from the police, although detectives always said it was actually the coroner. But it seemed like the police releasing that it was a mob hit, and seemed like that's where the investigation would go.
But you knew the mafia hadn't killed your parents,
Right.
right? So why did it frighten you that there was all this coverage about it being a mob hit?
Because nobody else knew that it wasn't the mafia, and my concern was that whatever my dad's connections were, and I really didn't have as many details as people might have thought, that I was going to be helping the police and was furthering the investigation and giving up information. And I just felt that if my dad was doing something real illegal, or if he had some connection that was concerned about being exposed, they might think the sons were just giving it all up to find out who killed their parents. And I didn't want to give that impression, and I didn't want anything to happen to Erik and I because of that reason. So we hired.
So, okay, let me just make sure I have this straight. It sounds like what he's saying is he's concerned that the fact that people are talking about this being a mafia hit, and then the public perception that he's working with the police, he's giving information to the police, that maybe this would accidentally uncover some sort of connections that Jose had with the mafia that would sort of give away some information that they wanted to be kept private. So at first I was not really feeling it when he was saying, I knew, but nobody else knew that I had killed my parents. At first I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. But I can kind of understand, maybe it's because I've seen enough I've seen enough mafia movies where you can have an accidental information disclosure, right? Because of just bad luck, right? Bad luck. The wrong guy gets killed, right? And now some people are sniffing around this person. And they might accidentally come across some information that person was keeping quiet, but now there's how many different cops that are, investigating and circling around this person. Someone's going to sniff something out. And maybe these boys know something about their father that we don't want to get out. I can kind of understand it. It's still not the most, like, I don't feel like, oh, okay, I'm 100% on board on that. But I can understand that line of reasoning at the very least.
I hired the guards at least in New Jersey.
How long did you have them?
About 2 weeks or so, just for a short period of time to see if anything would happen.
Did you, during that period of time, believe that you were followed ever?
We were being followed
How do you know you were being followed?
because the limo, the bodyguard driver, told me that we were being followed. And
Did you believe him?
yes. And then I believe one of the main bodyguards checked up on it and said it may be the FBI following me. He had a friend in the FBI, and that it might be the FBI.
Could you think of any reason why the FBI would be following you?
No, I don't think he believed that too much either.
At some point, did you ask Glenn Stevens to help you out with regard to contacting the mafia?
Yes,
Why did you ask Glenn Stevens to help you in that regard?
because his family actually had mafia connections, and
How did you know that?
because he bragged about it, and he actually did. They did actually have mafia connections.
How do you know that?
Because we went up and met with one of the people who was supposedly in the mob and ran the security company in New York. Certainly looked like he was in the mob. And
Let me stop you. Did you talk to Glenn Stevens about your concerns about the mafia?
yes,
And did he offer to set up a meeting for you?
yes,
And did he tell you something about who you would be meeting with?
yes.
And what did he tell you about the person you would be meeting with?
That he was a member of a crime family in New York, and that he would be a good person if I had concerns to talk to, since his father knew him very well.
And did you meet with this person?
Yes,
Do you remember his name?
yes.
What's his name?
His name is Tony Negri.
And where did this meeting take place?
At Anthony Negri's office in New York. And then we went out to a restaurant.
And did you tell him of your concerns?
Yes, I met with Glenn and I went up there. I believe it was just Glenn and I. And at some point I asked to speak with him privately so I could discuss this with him. And I told him my concern and that my brother and I were not interested in finding out who had killed my parents. And if he could maybe get the word out that we weren't helping in any police investigations, and if anybody was still nervous about that, whatever my dad was involved in, that we didn't want to know, and we had no concern for that. And
Did you tell him you had killed your parents?
no,
When you asked him to get the word out, I mean, did he tell you he would, or tell you he couldn't, or what did he tell you?
he told me that he would.
Did you feel
And-
better after that?
I felt better, and then we met again, and he told me that I had nothing to worry about.
Your Honor, if we could break at that point.
All right, we'll resume at 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you back here at 1:30. And we'll now resume with the direct examination of the defendant, Lyle Menendez, before the Lyle Menendez jury only. You may continue.
Mr. Menendez, I believe you'd indicated that the first girlfriend you had was a young woman named Stacy Feldman. Is that correct?
Right.
And after you broke up with Stacy, the next girlfriend you had was Jamie Pisarcik. Is that correct?
Right.
And when did you start going with Ms. Pisarcik?
At the end of the fall of '86.
And was she your girlfriend on and off for a period of time?
Yes.
And did you break up with her, or did she break up with you, rather, in February of 1989, the spring of '89?
In February of
89.
1989,
And this,
she broke up with me in February of '89, and then, okay.
and did you resume the relationship shortly after your parents died?
Yes.
In fact, did she attend the memorial service in New Jersey?
Yes.
And was she your girlfriend at the time you were arrested?
No.
Did you resume the relationship with her after you were arrested?
It took a little while, but basically we became boyfriend and girlfriend again.
So while you were in jail, was she visiting you?
She visited me immediately, like the day after I got arrested.
And was she coming to visit you regularly?
Yes.
How often was she coming to visit you?
Probably about 4 times a week or more. I mean, pretty often.
And what is entailed in someone coming to visit you at the jail? Is that just easy? You make an appointment and you walk in, or is it difficult?
No, it's very difficult. It's pretty oppressive, I think. So it's not an enjoyable experience for the most part. I mean, hopefully the visit is, but going and leaving is difficult.
And was she coming to court appearances for you? Was she coming to court when you went to court?
She was coming to court appearances, the ones she could. I mean, sometimes she was working.
Did she at some point begin to ask you about whether you had in fact killed your parents?
She never asked me until many months after I was arrested. She started to wonder, and she wanted to know, and then she started to really press me that she needed to know.
And did you decide to tell her?
Yes.
Was this in the fall of '90?
Yes.
Do you remember the exact date?
Not the exact date, but I believe it was in the fall.
And how is it that you told her?
I decided to write out, what had happened, and just essentially what had happened and why and some of the issues.
Why did you decide to tell her?
Because I didn't think it was fair with her coming down to the jail continually, and she had never asked me why, and this was obviously a very difficult thing to talk to her about, and I just felt like our relationship in the jail was getting to a point where it would be the right thing to do, and was feeling very guilty, and she was pressing me to know. And I could have said, my attorneys have said not to talk to anybody, which they had, but with her being my girlfriend, I felt I should anyway.
So you said you wrote a letter,
Yes.
a long letter or a short letter or what?
Several pages, pretty long.
And in that letter, did you tell her that you had killed your parents?
Yes.
And in that letter, did you explain what had happened?
Yes.
And did you explain to her information about your background with your parents?
Yes.
Did you tell her that Erik had been molested by your father?
Yes.
Did you tell her that you had been molested by your mother?
Yes.
Did you tell her that you'd been molested by your father?
No.
Why?
I just couldn't tell her that.
Why?
I was just something I could talk to her about my mom, but there were lots of reasons, but mostly because I was just ashamed, and I hadn't really decided. In fact, I had sort of in my own
Let
mind.
me go back. Why were you ashamed?
I don't know why. I just felt like that was not something. I mean, I knew that Erik had talked to people about it, but I wasn't going to say what happened to me. And
Why not?
I just, I don't know. It wasn't really. I mean, it was embarrassing, but it was really more than that. I just didn't want to say that my dad did those things. I didn't want to say the things he did to me. And
Why? Why didn't you want to say what your dad had done to you?
Because I was ashamed.
Were you concerned about your father?
I just didn't think that I could go through that. One problem was I felt, see, this was Jamie. I mean, there were two problems. One was Jamie herself being my girlfriend, and I really felt concerned that she would feel differently about me, and it would affect our relationship if I revealed this to her. And, talking about what happened with my mother was just not the same. I didn't think she would see it the same. And, but really at that point in time, there was a whole other issue of whether I would talk about this to anybody. And if I was asked to here, and I never wanted to have to do what I did here. And, it's been very depressing to have to do that, and I've felt drained since I've done it, and I felt like I betrayed my dad to some extent. There were a lot of things going on in my mind. I had a good relationship with my grandmother, and I didn't want her to hear those things from
Your
me.
grandmother, you mean your father's mother?
Right.
You said you felt like you betrayed your father. Why is it a betrayal of your father?
It just feels that way. I don't know why.
Do you want people to think well of your father?
I would have liked that.
Why? After all he did to you, do you want people to think well of your father?
I just missed the connection I had with him, and I loved him, and I felt, I guess, very guilty. And seeing my grandmother and people hurt.
Do you feel like you've betrayed him now by the things you've told about him here in court?
I have.
How
I
do you
have
feel?
betrayed him.
How do you feel about having betrayed him?
Just depressed. And wishing that I don't know. Sorry.
So in the letter, you didn't tell her about your father, is that right?
No.
Did you tell her about the fear?
Yes.
What did she say about the fear and the fight before? Did you tell her about that?
Yes. I wrote everything.
What did she say about that?
What did who say about it?
What did Jamie say about the fear and the fight?
Well, we didn't get that far.
What do you
Because
mean?
as soon as she read, at some point, she just got very angry. Basically about what I was saying happened to my brother. She didn't believe it. I don't know if she was angry about just hearing that I was involved. And she was, I was crying and she was very upset and I believe crying. And, she was sad, but she was angry. She didn't want to believe that. She didn't want to believe those things. She hadn't seen it herself, she said. And we basically, she didn't want to read anymore.
Did you have another conversation with her?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd like to play the tape at this point in time.
Is this tape an exhibit?
Yes, we mark it as the next one.
247.
And we have transcripts also, Your Honor, could we mark those as
248.
All
48?
right.
I believe the bailiff is
These recordings are
distributing that.
rough, though. The quality of them is always so terrible.
Your Honor, I believe there'll be a stipulation. This is the voice of Jamie Pisarcik.
Yes, and also there'll be stipulation that the court will not transcribe this.
That's correct.
Previous to or prior to him telling me that holding the letter up, I guess he was kind of working on his own defense type thing, and he had asked me to watch a movie called At Close Range. And that is what in that movie there was a scene where that is what they wanted me to say. He and his lawyer, which was Joel at the time, this is what Lyle was saying. I've never spoken to Joel. You talking about Joel? No, Joel. Had wanted me to say happened to me. Well, what happened to At Close Range? I had seen the movie before. I did not go home and watch it. I have not seen it. But in that movie, the father, I guess, makes it happen. Or I don't believe he rapes the one character with Sean Penn's girlfriend. he had asked me to say that that's what had happened. And it was
Lyle asked you that?
yes.
So Jose had made a pass at you just as a movie?
Yes.
And you're going to say something about that?
And that there was going to be a large sum of money placed in my bank account.
Who told you that?
Lyle had that.
It wasn't a threat, it was a bribe.
It was a bribe, I guess. And that if, and then I just said, this is one of the things that started me wondering about the whole thing. But and I just said if that ever happened, I'd go right to the police. And nothing was ever said after that. Nothing. There was no money put in my bank account. He said that's what I thought you'd say, and that's what I told Joel you'd say. He would never do that.
Did you get the idea that his attorney had helped him cook up this thing? Or did you ever talk to him?
No.
Okay, so
He
you
never
never
told me. So I don't know if this,
You don't know.
this is coming straight from Lyle. And,
So what he wanted you to say was the truth. Is that accurate to say?
yes, I can just say this, and I would never do anything like that towards him.
Was this at the same time that he had held it for another
No, this is previous,
previous to that?
yeah, 7 weeks or so.
But you just indicated that was sort of what started you thinking that you wanted.
Questioning
Okay.
everything.
Was there any other requests made like that from that point until the point that he held up the?
No, that was it. And he knew how I felt about it. And that's what it is. Now,
Menendez, is that essentially the way the conversation went?
Yes.
Your Honor, the remainder of the materials in front of both juries.
Oh, give the instruction. Yes, please.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are instructed that the reference just made to a lawyer named Joel does not refer to any lawyer now representing Lyle Menendez, and you are not to infer therefrom any impropriety by present counsel for either Lyle or Erik Menendez. All right? And are you now ready to have the other jury come in as well?
I am, Your Honor.
Okay, do we have everybody here?
We have somebody here and some outside.
Okay, let's make sure we have everybody, and if we do, then we'll have them all come in.
Okay, while we do that, let's take a break real quick and answer some questions here. First off, let's see. Oh, did he from Dater? Did he tell his girlfriend that his mother essayed him, or that they did something else? He didn't say essay when he, with his own words, testified earlier, right? I think they used the M word. And to be clear, it was Jill Lansing that asked him and basically asked him a leading question. Did you tell him, or did you tell her that, your father M'd your brother? Yes. Did you tell her that your mother M'd you? Yes. Did you tell, it was like that. So, the specific words that were used were Jill Lansing's, bit of leading, which sometimes, usually the courts will allow a little bit. There was no objection to it. So it was interesting. AB short clips. It says, this is a random question, but what are the Friday member streams like? Sometimes I have questions about your pets, but no, during these trial streams is not the right time. It's super casual. Basically it's just me chatting with you guys. I go through the whole chat. Yeah, we talk about all kinds of stuff. We'll talk about law. We'll talk about random life stuff. So if you would like to sit and chat about that kind of stuff, yeah, members only live stream is a great place to do that. Absolutely more than welcome. Guinevere Greenstone says, was Jill doing the original direct on Lyle in part 1 of his testimony? I was confused. Wasn't she Erik's lawyer? No. She is Lyle's attorney. It is Leslie Abramson, who is Erik's attorney. So yeah, Jill seems to be, I guess, the lead attorney for Lyle. She's been directing him since the very beginning of Lyle being up there. Debbie Faison Cook says she brought up the will. If she hadn't said anything about the will, would the prosecution still be able to ask him about it? Why did she bring it up? It looks bad. No, I mean, this is a sore spot for the defense. And so it looks better for them to bring it up on direct examination, because the concept is, taking out some of the sting from the poison, right? It's addressing it head on is always going to be better than sort of like leaving it for it to maybe come up on cross-examination, because then it looks like you're trying to hide it. If you try to address it up front to the jury, you are leaving no surprises for cross-examination. And it looks that much more dramatic to the jury if it is left for a surprise on cross-examination. So that's it. It is better for them to talk about it up front. Second, there is room for them to talk about it on cross-examination, even if they don't bring it up on direct. It's been mentioned by other witnesses. And we're talking about the death of his parents here. It's still within the scope of direct examination, even if they don't specifically talk about the will. We're talking about their death. It's natural that when someone dies, for there to be some sort of a will. And for someone who is one of the children of the two people who have died to be potential, beneficiaries of that will, it already falls within the scope of that direct examination, even if they don't explicitly bring it up on direct. But like I said, it's still better to bring it up first to take out that sting. Dater says, is the state being extra interesting in keeping this information out, or is it reasonable why they need to object this much at the moment? I am so sorry. I don't remember which moment they were objecting. There have been times that I've agreed with the prosecution and their objections, other times not so much. There's so much strategy involved in this. I am so sorry that I don't remember when this moment was. Christian Williams, from what you heard so far, how would you conduct Lyle's cross? Well, there really are two ways to go about it. Number one is go all in on, I don't believe you. I don't believe you on anything. I don't believe that you were abused. I don't believe that you thought that you were going to be killed by your parents. I don't believe that you actually had any concerns about mafia. Like go all in hard. And the thing is, if you do that, you have to go all the way in. You can't go halfway. It's a very sort of extreme position to take, but sometimes it's worthwhile. It's, in some cases, it has been very successful to go with that strategy. For example, in the Kevin Spacey trial, well, he's had a number of them, but the one that was a civil case in New York where someone had accused him of SA, and then it went to trial in it was a federal case in New York. And so I remember following it, and I remember the reporting on the opening statements was the defense went hard. The defense went really hard. They were like, not only is this person, not only did Kevin Spacey not do this, but this person is a horrible person for even accusing him and has all of this like financial incentive and motive and blah, 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 blah. And I just remember being like, that is a very extreme position to take, but it ended up working. The jury ended up agreeing, or at least agreeing that the plaintiff side didn't put their case on enough. So for them, it worked out. The other way is to say, hey, look, I understand that you say that you were abused. You can even, allow for the other side to say to not necessarily allow for the other side, but to not fight them on the childhood abuse. But then to say that still doesn't mean that you should have, or that you should have killed them. It doesn't mean that creates fear in what you say that you experienced, and really press in particularly most hardcore on his explanation of what happened between Erik disclosing to Lyle about the abuse continuing. And then, all of those steps in between, and really pressing in on like, okay, but like you got shotguns, like you didn't hire security guards for yourself, before your parents, die. I'm not necessarily saying that I believe these arguments, but making those kinds of arguments and really pressing on him for those. So, yeah, I mean, either one can play. I mean, we've got folks in the chat that are very hardcore convinced about the abuse. There are other people in the chat who are hardcore not convinced about the abuse. So, what is going to resonate with a jury? It's hard to tell when you are actually putting on a case, but in this particular case, it still is divisive. It really still is. People have some strong opinions one way or another. Okay. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Let's see here. And there was also a question from, I see from Dater up here. If Leslie cross-examines him, is it likely that she will be friendly towards both brothers, or could she bring doubts to Lyle's testimony? Well, actually, so spoiler alert, she doesn't cross-examine him. They don't at all. And I think that part of it is because there are portions of his testimony that are outside of the presence of Erik's jury. So that may have been a strategic decision by the two sides to make that decision so that they didn't have to push in on the other. I don't know. I've heard people say that Leslie threw Lyle under the bus. So maybe that was in the second trial. But as I was reviewing ahead of time for timestamps and stuff for this episode, I saw that they waive cross-examination. So it's going to be just the state that will be cross-examining here. But yeah, it's tough. It's a tough question of like what to do, whether to toss out the other one, or whether to go in like arm in arm. Okay. And also culparistic. How uncommon are split jury trials? This is very uncommon. I have never seen a trial like this. I've never heard of a trial like this. This is exceedingly rare. Every once in a while, I'll see a comment on one of these videos talking about how, someone's parent tried a case where there were, I think I saw at the most 3 juries for one trial, which is crazy. But yeah, anyway, it's very rare. It's very rare. Okay, let's continue on with the testimony here.
Mr. Menendez, on October 31st, 1989, did you receive a telephone call from Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
Where were you?
It's in the house in Beverly Hills.
And what did Dr. Oziel say to you? I'm sorry. Excuse me, I have to relocate. Okay. What did Dr. Oziel say to you?
He said that he had my brother in his office, and that my brother had told him everything.
What did you say?
I believe I asked him what he meant by that, and he just said he didn't want to talk about it on the phone, and I should come over.
Did you go over?
Yeah, he sounded very nervous and tense, and so I had a good feeling of what exactly they had talked about, so I definitely went over.
What did you think they had talked about?
I figured my brother had told him that what happened on Sunday. And I wasn't sure exactly what, but something to that effect, certainly that we were involved. And that they might have talked about turning ourselves into the police or something to that effect.
So you drove over there? Is that correct?
I drove over, yeah.
How long did it take you to get there?
Just a couple minutes.
And how were you feeling when you walked into the office?
Nervous and afraid that my brother may have decided that we should turn ourselves into the police, and that Oziel, who I knew from previous occasions, had this information.
Did you trust Dr. Oziel?
No.
Were you upset with your brother?
Yes, I was very upset.
So from before you even walked into the office, did you think you knew what had happened?
I was not sure what had happened, and I didn't want to know what had happened until I heard what it was that they wanted to do.
What happened when you walked in the office?
I walked in and I sat down and in the chair closest to his desk. And
How did he seem? How did Dr. Oziel
he
seem?
seemed very nervous.
How did your brother seem?
He seemed even worse, even more nervous and just agitated and, I guess wondering what I was going to think. So I sat down and Oziel wanted to tell me what had been said.
What did you say?
I told him that I didn't want to hear whatever my brother had told him,
Why?
because I wanted to talk to Erik first. And I didn't know if they were, basically because I didn't know if he was going to go to the police or what they had decided together, that they had now called me and wanted me to agree to turn myself in. And I just felt
He has thoughts.
that talking to Dr. Oziel at that point wasn't a good idea. I didn't want to do that.
So what did you do?
I just stayed. I didn't want to leave either. My brother was involved at this point, and I just basically wanted to hear what Dr. Oziel had to say.
Did you say anything to your brother?
At some point, my brother and I got into an argument, and I started shouting at my brother, basically. And
What were you saying to him?
I was upset that I was having this conversation with Oziel, and at some point I expressed that I felt like my brother had in some way trusted Dr. Oziel more than me, and why did he go to Dr. Oziel and not me first? Because Dr. Oziel had said that Erik was suicidal and had been having a lot of emotional problems and might commit suicide, and that's why he came to him. And I felt like he should have come to me, and I felt hurt just to a large degree and sort of betrayed by the fact that they had sort of gotten together and talked about things, and I had not had a discussion with my brother like this, really. We had not been able to talk about it. And so I was, in saying that to Dr. Oziel, my brother got very, I don't know if upset's the right word, but he was, in saying those things and in not wanting to talk about what he had talked to Dr. Oziel about, he was feeling, I guess you could use the word upset. It wasn't that he was angry, but he was just very unhappy about that.
Were you angry?
I was angry.
Were you angry with your brother?
I was angry with him.
Were you frightened?
Of the situation, yes.
Were you emotional?
It was a very intense meeting with me yelling at my brother, Oziel telling me that I seemed menacing to him, and
Jeez.
me sort of feeling cornered, partly my own fault because I didn't want to go and talk to them about what they wanted to talk about, yet I really couldn't leave. And
Why didn't you want to talk about what they wanted? First of all, what did they want to talk about?
well, just initially when I came in, Dr. Oziel wanted to tell me everything that he and Dr. Oziel, my brother and Dr. Oziel, had discussed, and I didn't want to hear it. And until I heard from my brother first. And essentially, I just wanted to leave with my brother.
Does anyone just feel like at this point, Dr. Oziel just shows up like a bad penny throughout this trial? It's never good. It's never good when we're hearing from him. Like regardless of how you feel about the Menendezes, you know what? Maybe I should make a poll about this. How do you feel about Dr. Oziel? I just think he's a scummy scumbag and he's everywhere. All right, let's continue.
Did Dr. Oziel say anything to you about confidentiality?
Yes.
What did he say?
Well, he said that I seemed menacing to him, and that that there was potential confidentiality, but that if somebody threatened him, or if he felt threatened, that there would not be confidentiality, and he could just go to the police and with the information he had. And actually, I believe he said that he would be obligated to go, but I'm not positive. But he said that if he felt threatened, it wouldn't be confidential, but that there was supposed to be confidentiality, and if he wasn't threatened, then this would be confidential, and he couldn't go to the police even if he wanted to. And this long discussion about narrative, more like about that.
Did you want him to go to the police?
No, I told him that that's exactly what I was afraid he was going to do.
Did you want him to feel threatened?
No, I wanted him to feel the opposite
Why?
because of what he just told me.
During the time that you were yelling at your brother and expressing how you felt about him having told this secret, how was your brother reacting?
He was crying, and he was sort of becoming hysterical, and at some point ran out of the room.
And what did you do when he ran out of the room?
I went to follow him.
What did Dr. Oziel do?
He wanted me to stay.
Why did he want you to stay?
Well, at some point he told me he wanted me to either there or in the hallway. I confuse the area sometimes, but that he didn't feel comfortable with me leaving and the session ending that way with Erik hysterical. And he told me that he felt threatened by my demeanor and that I had seemed menacing to him, and that he just felt very uncomfortable and wanted me to stay, at least since my brother was clearly not going to stay. And I told him that I needed to take care of my brother, and I wanted to just talk to my brother first, and then we could come back.
Were you very firm about that, about wanting to take care of your brother?
Yes, and it was clear that that's what I was going to do. I was like leaving, and we were kind of like, he was kind of like following me. And again, I'm not sure if he followed us all the way outside, so this could have happened right outside or upstairs. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that I said goodbye to him in the hallway, like by where the elevators are. But I believe then he followed me anyway downstairs, still saying that he felt uncomfortable and wanted me to go back upstairs with him, and me telling him no, and then we arranged that we would meet again.
Where did you go when you got downstairs?
We went, my brother was leaving. He got in his Jeep to leave. And I was trying to get my brother to relax, and while trying to get Oziel sort of to relax at the same time, and just tell him we'd come back. And I just didn't want to deal with Dr. Oziel. I wanted to talk to my brother, and he was sort of hysterical and ready to drive away. So at some point Oziel said, okay. And I quickly just sort of, I believe he said we'd see him whenever the date was, November 2nd or something, but I'm not positive. He may have said, I'll call you or something like that. But we arranged to meet again. I agreed I would with Erik, and
What
he
condition?
went back upstairs.
Dr. Oziel went back upstairs? Is that yes?
Yes.
What condition was your brother in at that point?
He was crying, pretty frantic, upset with me.
Why was he upset with you?
For saying that that going to Dr. Oziel had been sort of a betrayal of our trust, and that I believe I said something upstairs about how much could he love me if he trusts Dr. Oziel more than his own brother when he's suicidal and so on. So it was pretty intense for him, and I think he was upset, and I should not have said the things I said.
When you got to the Jeep, did you continue telling him that you thought that he was disloyal, or what were you
We
trying
didn't
to
talk at the Jeep, really. He wanted to leave, and so he left, and I told him I'd talk to him at the house.
Did you go back to the house?
Yes.
And when you got back to the house, did you talk about what happened?
Yes.
And did he tell you what had happened?
I asked him once he had calmed down, and just don't remember the conversation completely, but basically just asked him what he had said. At that point, I wanted to know what he had told Dr. Oziel, and he said that he had told him that we did it, and that nobody, I believe he said that nobody else knew that he had said this to Dr. Oziel, and that he was feeling very depressed and very suicidal, and that he couldn't come to me, that I was sort of unstable and changing my mind as to whether I wanted to play tennis or go to school or business, and that
Let me ask you, did he give you the details of what he said to Dr. Oziel?
no, and I believe he said he did not give him, that he said he did not, he told him he didn't know why it happened.
Did you talk about going back to Dr. Oziel? Did you talk with your brother about going back to Dr. Oziel?
Well, we talked about whether we should go back or not.
And was a decision made as to whether you would go back?
Yes, we decided that we should definitely go back.
And why did you decide to go back?
Well, it was either never talk to him again and not go back and not have any more contact with him, or go back. And since he had felt threatened by me and he had said this thing about confidentiality, I was very concerned that he was going to go to the police, especially if we didn't go back and just not return his calls or whatever. So my brother and I decided that it was definitely better to go back and try to just get him to relax and express to him that there was no problem, and basically see what Oziel wanted to do and feel him out and just sort of go with the flow, and try to get him. The main thing was to just get him to relax so that he didn't run to the police. And so
Did you make some decisions yourself about what you were going to talk to him about?
Yes.
And what decisions did you make about what you were going to talk to him about?
What decisions did I make myself?
Yes.
Well, Erik had not talked to him about what had happened with Dad, and I certainly wasn't going to talk about it. And I felt that we shouldn't talk about it. That I just didn't want to, and I was glad that he didn't, and that we shouldn't. And I actually didn't feel we should talk about anything, as little as possible, partly in case he did go to the police, but mostly just didn't want to talk to him about it. And Erik had said to him that he didn't know why, and that Oziel seemed to think he could figure out why, and just go back and, from what I knew of Oziel, I figured he would do a good job figuring it out. And we would talk about, he knew about my relationship between my parents somewhat, my family a little bit, and we would talk about that. And assuming that things were going well, we could just sort of continue to see him.
Were you going to talk about the facts of the killings themselves?
Because then we would have to talk about why, and we didn't want to do that. And so we just weren't going to volunteer it at this point since Erik had.
Did you go back to him then on November the 2nd?
Yes.
And Dr. Oziel said that he had told you both that he could be helpful to you in terms of describing the family constellation. That's what he's testified to here. Did he
Right.
say something like that to you?
I think that's exactly what he said.
And what did that mean to you in describing the family constellation?
Just talking about the emotions involved in the family, the personality of my dad, my mom, the interaction in the family, and the emotions that could conceivably have led to something like this, and maybe figure out why this happened.
Were you willing to talk about those things with him?
Yes.
Now, when you went in on November the 2nd, can you describe for us how the session was conducted?
Basically, like a regular therapy session, sitting down and him in his chair, and basically we talked about the family, like he said, the family constellation, and he would give his impressions from what he knew already and what he felt could have been going on that might lead to something like this. And he would sort of tell you, you would give some responses, and he would kind of tell you how he felt that you feel, and what you were feeling and what you might have been feeling before, and that could have led to this. And basically just talk about like the family dynamic, as he put it. And
Were you volunteering a lot of information?
no, we were not volunteering information, very little.
So you said that Dr. Oziel would tell you what he thought you were thinking at the time, that type of thing?
Yeah, he talks a lot, and he just, he rambled on about what it was he felt was going on. And
Which I have very limited experience with these kinds of, therapy sessions. Not much, but shouldn't it be the inverse? Like, shouldn't most of the talking be from the patient? That seems to be the impression that I at least have of various things that I've seen and heard about therapy, is that usually it's up to the person to talk about what's going on, and for the doctor not to really guide any of that information anywhere, just to let it go where it needs to go. But it just seems like there's the percentage of words spoken in these sessions, at least according to Lyle, seems to be flip-flopped of what it should have been. I already made up my mind. I clearly don't like Dr. Oziel. I personally think he's a scummy scumbag. And apparently 93% of the chat, well, 93% of the folks that have voted also agree with that. 7% said no. So not everyone agrees, which is entirely fair. As our friend Rick Hogue would say, reasonable minds can differ. So anyhow, okay, let's continue.
basically, knew a lot more about my dad. My mom's a very secretive person. He didn't have a good understanding of that, and I didn't want to talk about it. But essentially, basically, the only thing that was discussed about her was that she was depressed, which he knew at some point in her life, and might even have been suicidal. And we may have told him that. And
Let me
but
ask you, when he would give you these theories about what you were thinking or how you were feeling, was he right some of the times?
yes,
Was he wrong some of the times?
sometimes he was pretty far off base, but
Would you tell him when he was right? Would you say, yeah, that's the way we felt, or you were right about that?
sometimes if he asked us, we would tell him. Almost always, yes.
What about
A lot of times he didn't. He believed that we didn't really know exactly how we felt.
How do you know he believed that?
Well, partly because we were telling him we didn't know why this had happened, and so he was he accepted that as, that we sort of like, of course you don't know why, and there's just all these things going on in your family and the way you were brought up and in your mind, and just felt that he could piece it together through figuring out what was going on between everybody, and my mom's depression, my dad's controlling nature, and maybe he suggested that down the road we might be able to figure this out, get it out through hypnosis or get it out through some way.
Hi, Andy. Good to see you. Thanks for popping in.
So a lot of times he didn't think we knew exactly how we felt.
So did you agree with him generally with whatever conclusions he came up with about your family? Or would you tell him it's wrong?
No, I would basically.
Yeah, the part about hypnosis also seems a little wackadoo. But yeah, I don't know what the modern standards are. I don't know what the standards were back in 1989, 1990, 1992, 93, right? Having to do with hypnosis, but I hear that, and it that sounds a little wackadoo to me.
Basically agree. He would say it in a way that you just agreed, and he had a pretty good understanding of some of the issues, and so we stayed pretty much among those issues.
Were you eager to tell him a lot of things about your family?
Well, we knew what we didn't want to talk about, and I basically didn't want to tell him anything about my family if I could help it. I didn't want to be there, but
So then what's the point of any of it? Right? Like it seems like Dr. Oziel is never going to be getting all of the relevant information. It is absolutely crucial to get the information about his family in order to understand what's going on with Lyle and Erik. It's essential to get that information.
part of the problem was, at least for me, was my brother was
USC Jane 714.
suicidal and depressed. And Oziel would say some things that made Erik feel better, like when he said that my mom was so depressed she would have wanted to be killed, and we'd probably done her a favor, he said. And we were both very impressed about my mom's death, and that made Erik feel better. And so those were things where he was not really correct, insofar that I don't think my mom was depressed to that point and suicidal when she died, but it made Erik feel better, so I just sort of agreed. So there were things like that he would say.
Dr. Oziel said that he told you that he had put tapes in safety deposit boxes. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did he tell you about having done that before for other patients or with other patients, that he'd put tapes in safety deposit boxes?
Yes.
What did he tell you in that regard?
For the hitman, he said he treated a hitman, and with certain situations, basically, I guess, that involved knowing about people that had died, he would take certain precautions. That was basically taping notes of his dictation and putting them in safety deposit boxes, and that's what he said he did with us.
And did you believe that he had done that?
Yes.
Dr. Oziel said that when you came in on November the 2nd, that you said that you and Erik had sat in the Jeep laughing and talking about killing him, that you told him that you and Erik had this conversation in the Jeep.
Right.
You remember him testifying to that?
Yes.
Was that true? Had you and your brother sat in the Jeep and talked about
No.
killing Dr. Oziel?
No, we didn't, and but we did discuss that because he felt that he said that.
Let
Yeah.
me stop you. First, did you have the discussion in the Jeep?
No, we never had any discussion in the Jeep.
Was your brother in a joking mood in the Jeep after
No, he
the
was.
October 31st session?
He ran out of the room, ran down. He was hysterical. He was trying to get the Jeep started, and he wouldn't wait around to talk. I just told him we'd talk at home, and he took off.
Did this conversation come up with Dr. Oziel on November 2nd? Was there some conversation about you and your brother sitting in the Jeep and plotting his murder?
Yes. He said that in talking about how, basically at the beginning of the session, when he was saying that he was not happy with the way that the last session ended, that he had felt threatened by, basically by me, my behavior and the way I was looking at him and so on. That he had this image after it was over that we were in the Jeep, sitting down in the Jeep, plotting to kill him. And I told him we hadn't had any discussion in the Jeep, and that was ridiculous, and that we weren't doing that. He was basically joking, but he also seemed concerned.
Did he still seem nervous?
Yes.
Was that of some concern to you?
It was
That he
of
was nervous?
great concern to me,
Why?
because we were there. That's basically why we were there, because we knew he was concerned, and we didn't want him to go to the police. And he was saying that he could do that since he had felt threatened.
And when he told you about, wondering if you were sitting in the Jeep plotting to kill him, he said that you said something like it wouldn't look too good if he disappeared. Remember him testifying to that?
Yes, I remember that.
Did you say that?
No.
He testified that there was a discussion in which there was a discussion about whether somebody was willing to live in fear. And Dr. Oziel said that he wasn't willing to live in fear, and he said that you said, neither did my father. Now, was there any discussion about living in fear with Dr. Oziel? Do you remember any discussion of that nature?
Yes.
And what was that discussion, as you remember it?
That was in talking about my dad's personality and the fact, and I was expressing that my dad was a fearless person, and that there had been times when he had intense negotiations with essentially gangster-connected people like Barry Gordy and so on, that he wasn't afraid by any of the threats that he would get from time to time, that he didn't choose to live his life in fear. And that's something that I often said to people, that my dad never chose to live in fear, and that he was essentially fearless. And I think I told that to Detective Zoller too.
Did Dr. Oziel tell you that he was going to try to work with you to try to resolve whatever issues you had emotionally that had led you to commit the crimes? Remember him saying something like that?
Yes.
And was that what the purpose of all of this was, of meeting with him
Yes.
from his perspective?
Yes.
There can call for speculation as to his perspective.
Restate the question, please.
Is that what he indicated
Yes.
his perspective was?
Right.
And did you tell him that you were in agreement with that?
That I was in agreement with what?
With the idea of trying to figure out what had caused you to commit the crimes? Did you tell him that you were there to work on that with him?
Yes.
Dr. Oziel said that they had a conversation, that he had a conversation with you and your brother with regard to hating your father and why you had to kill him. Do you remember him testifying to that?
Hating my father and why I had to kill him.
Dr. Oziel testified that you and your brother said that you'd hated your father and told him why you had to kill him. Do you remember having a discussion with regard to hating your father?
I believe that I said that I hated him for dying and that there were times that I hated him for some of the things he did to my mom.
What did you mean you hated your father for dying?
Well, for a long period of time, I was, it sounds bad, but I felt like it was my dad's fault that this had happened and that my life was sort of a shambles because of it, and that I was sort of lost and depressed and suicidal, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and just incredible pain and guilt, and blame my dad essentially
Did you
for
know?
letting it get to that point, and so I was angry with him. I don't know how to better describe it. That's basically what I was feeling.
Did you know that was irrational when you felt that way? Or did you believe when you had these feelings? I mean, at some level, did you know that didn't make any sense?
I knew that, yes, because obviously I'd killed him, but I'm not sure that it. None of it made a lot of sense to me, but that's definitely what I was feeling, and I don't know how else to describe it.
Did you think your life?
So I will say, I've said many times, grief can take many, many forms. And all of the emotions that you have towards your parents, parents are never perfect, right? Perfect is not a word that I would use anywhere near Kitty or Jose, obviously, for obvious reasons. But when you have a family member like a parent that dies, the grief brings with it all kinds of emotions. It brings with it, the fact that you loved your parent, the fact that they had flaws, the fact that there are things that maybe you were angry at them for, that your life could have been a little bit different had they not done X, Y, and Z, or had they done X, Y, or Z. There's all kinds of reasons why you could feel all of these complex feelings. And here it's also mixed in with the fact that he's the one that brought about his father's death. So I can understand why he would say that he like went through a period of time where he was blaming his father for his father's death, because there's if you feel like you were pushed to that point by your circumstances and you had no other real choice in the matter, I can see that being a situation where you also are saying, why did you do all of these things that pushed me to that? But, I can understand why that doesn't work for everyone. I'm just saying, like, I've seen people, deal with all kinds of emotions after, a parent dies, going from basically like deifying them in a certain respect to trashing on them and being angry and being, there's all kinds of emotions that can come up in, in the grief process. And that is not exclusive to people who, didn't bring that death about. Let me get a couple questions here. Miss Fitness 3, Alita, do you believe the abuse angle? I do. And the reason for that is because I think there were enough touch points around them with other family members that seemed reasonable, but mostly because of Lyle's telling of what happened. He came across as very sincere, and also Erik's reaction to Lyle's testimony. The part in particular when Erik was talking, or when Lyle was talking about what he did to Erik as a kid out in the woods, and you just see the side of Erik's face, and you see this temple, or this vein in his temple just popping out. And he's got like tears that are just coming down his face, and he's like trying to hold it together. That shit was real. That shit was absolutely real to me. Obviously what happens on cross-examination is, going to impact how I feel one way or another, whether it's more strongly or maybe kind of undermines the way that I'm feeling about that, or thinking about that at this point in time. But like, those emotions just came across to me as very, very, very sincere. I, at this point, think that they absolutely were abused by their parents. As horrifying as it is to think that actually does exist. Christian Williams says, do you think Oziel hurt the prosecution case? Yes. He created an entire side quest for the jury and for us, right? Because we're like, it's almost like we've got two trials here at this point, right? We've got Erik and Lyle Menendez, and then we've got, is Dr. Oziel a bad dude? That this sort of took on like a whole portion of this trial, that at one point it started, like, I had to remind myself, oh yeah, we're here for the Menendez brothers. Like Dr. Oziel is not on trial here. It's the Menendez brothers that are on trial. But we just got so knee deep in Dr. Oziel's testimony, and whether or not he's a credible witness. And I personally think that he was just completely disassembled by the defense. And apparently we are still going to hear from more witnesses, at least one more, right? The girlfriend, right? Judalon Smith, that we're supposed to hear from her at some point. So yeah, it's pretty, he's been pretty bad for the prosecution, I think.
Your life was better or worse after your parents died?
Ooh, tough
It
question.
was much worse to me. I was depressed on and off, and feeling lost all the way up to the moment I got arrested. It was incredibly different. I felt very lost, and really from the moment the police left the house. They didn't leave any instructions as to what we should do, and we didn't know until relatives started arriving immediately and taking over. So I had no idea didn't know how to pay bills, didn't know anything, and just kind of feeling like this incredible pressure and all the fear and everything that was going on. And then suddenly it was over. My parents were taken away, and it was just my brother and I. And we never got our act together in any way up until the time we got arrested. And it wasn't too long after that the thing with Oziel started, and that was a lot of stress, pressure, and I was sort of being pulled in so many different directions. You wish you could go back to just being at the condo and at school and everything the same as it was, although had not been great. It had been better than it had ever been for me, at least in my life. On the other hand, my brother's situation was not tolerable, and his life was a wreck. So for him, maybe it was better, although it certainly didn't seem like it.
You say it didn't seem like it. You mean because of how he acted?
Yes.
How did he act? After your parents died, how did your brother act?
Suicidal, depressed, crying on and off.
Dr. Oziel testified that you and your brother told him that you felt you had to kill your father because he was constantly ridiculing you, putting you down, controlling your every activity, controlling you in every way, that he made you to feel not adequate, that he made you feel inferior, that he dominated him, that you knew you couldn't please him. Remember him testifying to all those things?
Yes.
And were those things discussed with Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And did you volunteer that information, or did your brother, or where did it come from?
We all talked about it, but those were things that Oziel felt he knew well and could talk about at length and did. And essentially, I agreed with him that those things, my dad had those characteristics, and the relationship was often like that, although really not at the end. But he certainly had those characteristics.
Dr. Oziel testified that you said you wanted to write a book about your father, you and your brother.
Yes, we
Did that
did.
conversation take place?
Yes.
Did you and your brother tell him you wanted to write a book about him?
Yes.
And did you want to?
Yes.
Why?
My brother and I talked about the fact that my dad was, and we were trying, the family was completely focused on the good things I remembered about my parents, especially my dad, with the success and the sort of rags to riches story. And there was a lot of pain and feeling from my grandmother there, and I was getting the sense in the community that this was sort of a loss for the Cuban community, that he would have gone on to be senator and this greatness. And my brother and I talked about making a book that would be about all the great things he had achieved, and that everybody would appreciate that. And I thought that would be a great idea, so I wanted to do that.
Why did you want to write a book praising your dad after the things he had done to you?
So I just, for those reasons I said, I just admired his success, and I felt like there were a lot of people in the whole Cuban community in Miami and so on that were admiring the sort of myth of my father, and just wanting to preserve that. and my own feeling of the guilt, which just seemed to grow with myself and I think with Erik as relatives continued to talk about how great my dad was. And also, some of them had a very big misconception as to the family and the image of the family and the relationship between my mom and dad. And I remember my Uncle Brian talking about it was like a storybook romance and how great the relationship was, and which of course wasn't true. And so those things were making me feel guilty. So
Did you
So-
tell people when they talked about what a great relationship your parents had? Did you tell them about the affairs and what your mom's condition had been like?
no, I mean, occasionally I would say a few things so they'd get a little better perspective, like Carlos Menendez and that talk I had with him at the Hyatt about the computer. I mentioned to him that my dad had affairs and the marriage was really not so good. And the sense I got was that he hadn't really known that.
You told us that there had been this discussion by Dr. Oziel that your mother was suicidal and that what you had done was really putting her out of her misery. Remember Dr. Oziel testifying about that?
And I believe he said that we had done her a favor.
Was that what you said or Erik said, or is that what Dr. Oziel said?
No, that's what he said.
Jeez.
I never said that. And, but it did make Erik feel better. And so I agreed. And I guess there might have been some further discussion that putting her out of her misery or something like that. I don't, it's possible.
Dr. Oziel also testified that you said that the reason that she was killed is because she was a witness and you couldn't think of any way to kill your father without killing her. Do you remember him testifying to that?
Yes.
Did either you or your brother ever say that?
No. We didn't say that. And that doesn't make any sense.
Why doesn't it make any sense?
Well, just that there would, if my father had been, just the statement that there would be no way to kill my father without killing my mother, it really doesn't make any sense because my dad traveled constantly and I was with him alone in New Jersey all the time and alone with him many different places on the way to tennis practices and different things. And that whole thing that Oziel was talking about does not make any sense to me.
Dr. Oziel said that you had told him that you had this perfect plan that you couldn't deviate from. Do you remember him testifying to that?
Yes.
Did you tell him you had this perfect plan?
No.
Did you have a plan?
No. And we never discussed with Oziel anything surrounding what happened or what happened as far as the details of it or any of that. And in fact, the only thing we discussed was some of the aftermath and just sort of how completely chaotic it was and how we had expected to get caught and go to jail or the police would arrest us and that had not happened. And him sort of agreeing.
So when you saw him on October 31st and then you were there with your brother on November 2nd, you didn't discuss any details of how your parents had actually died. Is that correct?
No.
This was all of the session directed at figuring out the reasons why it had happened rather than how it had happened?
Right. He was trying to figure out, he was sort of fishing for and trying to figure out the reasons why, since my brother had told him he didn't know why, and I was not helping and saying I didn't know why either. And he felt that he could figure it out, and basically that's what we were talking about. And I didn't feel that I could, if we got anywhere near the details, we would have to tell him why and the issues, and we weren't going to do that. So we just stayed away from it completely. And I just told him I didn't want to talk about it whenever he would bring it up, and so he really wouldn't bring it up. Occasionally he would want to get a better sense. Maybe he could figure out why, and I would say that it made me very sad, and that I did not want to talk about what happened, and he accepted that.
Dr. Oziel testified that Erik said that he had noticed that your mother was getting very nervous and agitated shortly before she died and began locking doors. And do you remember any sort of discussion about what your mother's condition was right before they died?
I don't remember that.
Do you remember talking about what her behavior was during that period of time? Or do you remember?
I don't, not when I was there. I don't remember that. He talked about her emotional state through that period and what she was feeling, but not specific to that weekend, because we never talked about what was going on that weekend. So.
Now, Dr. Oziel, Your Honor, could we perhaps take a break at this point? I'm going to start another section, so
Well, how much longer do you have?
I probably have another half hour to 45
Let's see if
minutes.
we can continue.
She's actually quite accurate. She's got another 45 minutes of testimony.
You indicated that, strike that. Dr. Oziel testified that you made a comment to him which said, you said that your father had said, you can kill me if you want to, but you won't get any money if you do, or words to that effect. That was Dr. Oziel's testimony. Do you remember telling Dr. Oziel anything about your dad and money? And whether you would get it?
Well, I told him I was out of the will, but I never told him that that conversation had happened, and there's no way that anybody that knows my dad would know that could never have happened, that somebody would threaten my dad. I would be in the hospital if I intimated to my father that I was going to kill him or hurt him. That could not have happened.
Okay,
And
so
the
they-
meek response that he would just say, you're not going to get any money, is Oziel just didn't really know that side of my father, and I did not say that, and I would never have said that.
And your dad wouldn't say something like, you can kill me if you want to?
That could never happen. Nobody would have said that to my dad, and he certainly would never have had that response.
That sounds about right.
Did you have any discussion with Dr. Oziel about what would happen if you had children and what they might do to you? Dr. Oziel testified that there was a discussion about what might happen to you and your brother if you had children, and that the two of you and your brother, expressed some fear that your children might end up killing you. Do you remember any discussion about that?
Yes.
And what was that discussion?
He was explaining to us that people tend to do to their children what their parents did to them, and how that sort of goes from generation to generation, and how that relates. And just expressing to us that we might control our children, and the same sort of dynamic might come up in our own families later on when we had families, and might rise to our children killing us.
Now, is that a topic that you brought up or Dr. Oziel brought up?
He was explaining, he brought it up. He was explaining to us that this is the phenomenon, or, that it goes from generation to generation, and how that could happen.
Dr. Oziel said that you told him that you were very sad about having killed your mother, and you didn't even like to think about the fact that you'd killed your mother.
Right.
Did you say something like that to him?
Yes, that's what I told him.
And Dr. Oziel testified that you said you didn't have any real maternal feelings toward her, and you didn't really respond to her as being a mother figure. Is that correct?
That's right.
And he said that you told him that you saw her as a pitiful person, somebody who was completely dominated by the father, and that she had a lot of potential. Did you tell him that?
Not in those words, but I talked about the fact that she was very unhappy with the marriage, and had been, and was at times dominated, and, but was an extremely powerful and capable woman herself.
Did you tell him that she was very bright and there were all sorts of things that maybe she could have been, but
Yes,
she was never able to do those things?
right. And those are the things she had told me. So I told him that that's what she had said.
And he testified here that you acknowledged that you fired the shot that actually killed your mother in the end. Did you tell him that?
I did.
Is that because you believe you fired the last shot to your mother?
Right.
Do you know if she would have lived or not if you hadn't fired that shot?
My brother and I felt that she wouldn't have lived regardless. That
Is that from what you heard here in court, or is that what you knew the night you fired the shot? The night you fired the shot, did you know what condition she was in?
no, but we talked about it afterwards, and we felt.
Dr. Oziel said that he had talked to you about whether the two of you had killed your parents for the money. Did you talk to him about that?
Could you say that again?
Yes. Dr. Oziel testified that you discussed with him whether you killed your parents for the money or not.
That we discussed with him whether we had done for the money or not?
Yes. Was there any
But-
discussion of that nature?
Yes, I told him that we were out of the will, and he seemed very involved with the financial aspect with the estate and everything. And there was one moment when he tried to say that, I basically asked if that had something to do with it, and I told him that,
And when you
that I
say-
knew.
Excuse me, can we finish?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just about that part, I knew that it had not been for money.
You said that he showed some interest in the estate, in the financial matters. Is that correct?
Yes.
Ugh.
When had he first shown some interest in the financial aspect of the situation?
From the very beginning, when he came over shortly after my parents died at the hotel.
Did he spend a great deal of time at the hotel and around you right after your parents died?
Yes.
And what was he doing during that time?
Giving advice.
What kind of advice?
Well, just saying that he was there. When he was saying he was there if we needed him, we wanted to come to him for therapy, which we did not. But he was helping us find a lawyer that could handle the probate and giving us suggestions. And I guess he seemed to say he was a big businessman and knew lots of different lawyers, and he could help us with regards to that. And I believe that he did give us some suggestions.
Did he seem to be interested in how much money you were going to get?
I don't know at that time if he asked. We did have some discussions as to the problems with the estate, and that it would be very complicated since my dad basically didn't pay taxes and for several years. So he felt that we needed to get a big time lawyer to handle it, and it revolved around that. So I'm not sure if figures came up because I didn't really know the figures at that point.
Did he seem to want to be involved in your financial future?
Yes,
In-
certainly later on in the session, he wanted to.
And how did he express that interest?
Well, he said that he was under a tremendous amount of stress since my brother had come to him, and that he couldn't sleep, and that he was going to have problems working in the same way. But this was, very heavy burden for him.
Oh, hang on a sec. Dang it. My earbuds died on me. Let me see here. Sorry, guys. Hold for one moment. I should have taken one out. Dang it. They're completely dead. Okay. All right. Hopefully this will not cause any echo for you guys. I'm going to play it off of my computer speakers. Okay. Okay. All right. Let me know if there's echo. I apologize if there is.
Him. And that we were going to be getting all this money, and he was a good businessman. He showed us in his business cards, and that he could be helpful if I was going off to school and investing the money, and that he had ideas, and that we could go into business together at some point. When I eventually, the estate went through and everything was processed and the money came through. Basically what we discussed.
Okay, when you say he was going to be of some help to you when the estate was processed and...
Right. At that time, I was thinking of going to school the next semester, and he was going to maybe help me, since I would be in school, help me invest the money. So at that time, that's what we were talking about.
And was it your feeling that if he came to you with some suggestions about how to invest the money, that you'd go along with them?
Well, I didn't feel that we had a lot of choice about going along with him.
Why?
Just, he had said he had tapes and safety deposit boxes. He was very nervous, uncomfortable. There was no confidentiality since he felt threatened. He could go to the police.
Wait a second. He was offering to help them invest their money after all of this? Like after he said that he had... That's insane. That's insane. That is not someone who is trying to minimize his exposure to, some threat on his life. I'm sorry. No, you do what you can to try to like minimize that professional, relationship or what have you. You don't go around and being like, okay, well, actually, let me see your money. Let's invest it here. Oh, I just so happen to have this project over here that you guys can invest in. Like that's what I feel like that would turn to. So it definitely feels like some blackmail BS right there. Blah. Blah. I hate it.
The sense I got was that he was under a lot of stress and would have trouble working and wanted to be compensated by being able to help us invest and us go into businesses together. And
Oh God.
we would both profit. He didn't want me to just give him money. he wanted to be legitimate, but he wanted to be
Oh,
involved, and he had lots of good ideas.
And did it ever come to pass that the estate went through and you got money from it?
No, I got arrested before the estate went through.
So you never had a situation come up with regard to him actually giving you a definite business proposal?
No.
Did you also think he had expectations with regard to you attending sessions or setting up sessions and paying for them?
Speculation.
Rephrase the question, please.
Did you believe that you were expected to continue seeing Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And did you make a series of appointments and not keep them?
Yes.
Did you pay for them?
so another way of putting this is Dr. Oziel loves to screw all of his clients. If they're male, he just tries to do so financially. Blah.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Because I felt that, he was expressing concern right after the first meeting with just us not being in contact with him. And then as, the relationship was getting, I thought at the end of November 2nd, he didn't seem concerned about us at all. And it seemed more like it was going to move into a business relationship as long as we agreed. And,
You say he
but
didn't
never,
when you say he didn't seem concerned, are you talking about his fear level? Or?
yeah, he didn't, yeah, he was saying that he felt threatened before, and he had made that joke about us planning to kill him. And so I felt like he was no longer afraid.
Okay, so that's what you thought on November 2nd.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
You're
when you
afraid
saw
of
him on
someone-
November,
When you're afraid of someone, you don't offer to like intermingle their finances with your projects or your life, or like you don't offer to like get even more involved with their life than what you already are. That's so dumb. So dumb. Ugh. Ugh. I dislike Dr. Oziel so much.
November 2nd, he said that he described two different types of killings. Do you remember him testifying to that?
Yes.
And he said that one killing was premeditated and involved a plan and a job that needed to be accomplished, something that had to get done. There weren't any feelings, and that the second kind of killing was something that just came up all of a sudden. There wasn't any premeditation. It was like walking in and finding your wife with a lover, something like that. Do you remember him testifying here to that effect?
Right.
And that the second one was out of intense emotion, and it was just something that came out right away.
Right.
Did you have some sort of discussion with him with regard to different kinds of killings? Did he
No,
describe-
just those two.
Okay. How did he describe them for you?
Well, the first one was simple. That he basically just said it's when a man comes home and finds his wife in bed with someone else, and he had no idea, and in the spur of the moment, he just, I guess, kills the guy or whatever he said, and then the second one was something where you knew what the problem was, and it was sort of an ongoing thing, and this happened as a result of that. And he used the words you described there. I'm not exactly sure, because it was a much more complicated version and there was no example. It was just sort of more theoretical, and
When you say
I just felt like,
When you say a much more complicated version,
right.
I mean, he gave you lots more facts than he gave when he testified here?
He gave no facts, just a larger theory.
Okay. And did you and your brother pick one of those two?
Yeah, I'm not sure which one of us picked, but I know that we both agreed that that it was more, neither one fit. It certainly wasn't the first one. And
Why do you say it certainly wasn't the first one? The first one's where a husband comes home and finds his wife in bed, something like that.
right.
Why wasn't it that one?
Well, because we knew what, that was something that was sort of like a surprise, and that the person didn't know anything about the situation until he walked in the room, and that certainly wasn't what happened. And it was more like the second one, where we knew what the threat was and what the issue was and the problem, and we had taken steps to protect ourselves, and this had sort of occurred because of that, and it was just more like the second one. So we just said that it was more like the second one.
Now, when he described it here, he said he used words like premeditated, a job that needed to be accomplished, weren't many feelings. Is that what you agreed with? Is that the way he described it to you?
He didn't say anything about a job needed to be accomplished or anything like that. He just described it as something where there was, I believe he did say a problem, and that what had happened was solve the problem. It's basically what he was saying. It was more along those lines. It didn't fit what happened exactly, but it was more closer certainly than the first example.
Did either one of them fit the situation?
No.
He
didn't know what the situation was, so he was sort of at a disadvantage.
Did you say to him neither one of those fit?
I believe I said that it wasn't really either of them, but it was more like the second one, is what one of us said that. It may have been myself.
Now, was it a crime where there were no feelings involved?
No, but I don't think that's what he said either. The second one was not one where there were no feelings.
When he testified here in court, he said that the second one involved premeditation. Do you remember him using that word when he talked to you and your brother about it?
No.
All right, let's take our recess at this point, and we'll resume at 3:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss the case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume with both juries at 3:30. Continue your direct examination.
Quick recess. You know what? Let's answer the questions that came up since then. Okay. Guinevere Greenstone says, question, without Oziel, would the brothers have even been charged? I think there's a decent chance of it. It seems like both of them were sort of caving and talking about it. Lyle wrote in the letter to his girlfriend that they had done it, and he said why they had done it, from his perspective, or why he says that they had done it. Which that of course was after the arrest. So, that's timing wise. That's not, I'm not saying that they would have been charged, because he wrote to her. Cause I was, time wise, I was afterwards. Hi, puppy. Oh yes. Yes. You have a puppuccino. She's maybe a little Starbucks, dog toy. But Lyle clearly felt the need to tell someone. He told his girlfriend. Erik felt the need to tell someone. At some point, they probably would have broken down and told someone else if Erik hadn't revealed that to Dr. Oziel. That's my opinion. I mean, obviously, that's speculation, because that's not a situation that that we can know with any sort of certainty, but that's just kind of how I feel about it based on what we've seen. David Faison Cooks, is if it's obvious who they are talking about with a pronoun, do they have to specify for the record or to make sure the jury knows who's being talked about, or both? I'd say both. You need to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to who they're talking about, for everyone's clarity. Love Dreaming Peach says, question, Alita, I read a headline about a new letter one of them had written to their cousin. Do you know about it, and does that offer them any new options? Yes. Yeah, we've talked about that. That was in the new petition that their lawyers had filed, I guess, for, I can't remember exactly, either for a new trial or what have you. I don't know what's resulted from that, but I don't know that it's really going to do much, because that letter in particular, it's from Erik to their cousin Andy. And it's from around the time, before they killed the parents. Erik says something along the lines of like, it's still happening, or it's happening again. I think he says it's still happening. The thing is, because Erik was the one who wrote it, he would have had actual notice of having written the letter. Maybe he forgot about it. Doesn't really matter. When it comes to evidence that didn't come in, that was unavailable at the time of trial, like we would be having a very different conversation if it was from one cousin to another cousin that, was never seen by either of the defendants, was never seen by really anybody else. And for whatever reason, it never got brought in. No one asked any questions about it. But because it's from Erik, they would have had notice of the letter's existence. It was like, in Andy's like stuff in his storage unit or something at the time. They could have had a search party in that storage unit if someone had either thought about it, or maybe they thought about it and decided not to pursue it at the time. Either of those are totally possible, but they at least in theory could have searched that storage unit to find the letter, to include it. So I'm not particularly optimistic about that having any sort of real impact on this case, sort of moving forward. Okay. So we've got another like 25 minutes left here in this testimony. So let's continue.
Menendez, I'd like to take you back, if I can, briefly to October 31st, when you first met with Dr. Oziel. And Dr. Oziel testified here that, when you first came in, you said that it was extremely stupid that Erik had told him, Dr. Oziel, and had confessed all the details to the crime. Do you remember him testifying to that?
Yes.
And did you say that when you first went in on October 31st?
No, maybe something to that effect, but not those words.
Did you say, did you tell Erik that you thought it was stupid that he'd confessed?
I may have said that.
And would you have said something about him having told all the details? It was stupid that he'd told all the details of the crime?
No, I couldn't have said that because we didn't get into the details. In fact, I didn't know anything that he had told Dr. Oziel other than that he had confessed.
So when you arrived on October 31st, you didn't have a chance to talk to your brother separately, did you?
No.
And I believe you've testified here already that you didn't want to hear the details of what Erik had told Dr. Oziel. Is that correct?
Right. I wanted to hear him from Erik.
So the session that you had with him, or the time that you spent with Dr. Oziel on October 31st, was that directed at anything other than you're confronting your brother about having talked, and you're talking to Dr. Oziel about whether you're going to come in and have future sessions? Was that all that you talked about then? Do you understand the question, or would you like me to try again?
Well, there were other things that were talked. I mean, the confidentiality was talked about, Oziel's own feelings about the way I was acting.
Okay. Was there any discussion about the details of the crime?
No.
Was there any discussion about what specifically Erik had told Dr. Oziel?
No.
Did you say to him that since Erik had now told the details of the crime, it wasn't a perfect murder anymore?
No.
Did you ever tell him it was a perfect murder?
No.
Dr. Oziel said that when you first came in, you were very fearful that he would go to the police or tip the newspapers, and that you didn't believe there was any way for you to be safe now that Dr. Oziel had the information. Did you say something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Were you interested in giving him any more information?
No. Especially in that session.
Did you say something to Dr. Oziel such as that you'd have to figure out what to do about the problem?
I told him I hadn't decided what to do as far as whether I would agree to have a session with him and Erik again and discuss anything. Basically, I didn't want to talk about anything at that point. And I wasn't sure whether I would be seeing him again or not.
Dr. Oziel described you as menacing and threatening when you were in the room with him and your brother. You think that that's what your behavior was?
No.
What was your behavior?
Extremely upset, very sort of feeling cornered, and this whole thing going on with my brother, and whether he loved me and whether it was a betrayal of trust, and also a tense situation with Dr. Oziel about whether I should believe him that he wasn't, just go straight to the police, and that we should have further sessions with him, and it was very tense. And he did say that I seemed menacing to him, but I didn't mean to give him that impression.
Dr. Oziel said that you said you didn't feel safe, and you didn't know that there was any way you could feel safe with him having the information. Did you make a comment like that?
Yes.
Dr. Oziel said that you told him that you didn't want to have anybody looking over your shoulder, and that's why you killed your parents to begin with. Did you tell Dr.
No.
Oziel that?
No, and that's not why.
Dr. Oziel said that you seemed threatening and unhappy, and that some of it was directed toward Dr. Oziel, some of it toward Erik, and that Erik was getting increasingly agitated. Do you remember him testifying to that?
Yes.
And was Erik getting increasingly agitated?
Yes.
He says that at one point Erik buried his head in his hands and bolted out of the session. Did he do that?
Yes.
And as soon as he got up and bolted out of the session, did you leave or did you stay behind?
I went to follow him, and Oziel didn't want me to go, but I did follow him, and Oziel followed me. So we all left the office.
Dr. Oziel testified that he suggested to you that he thought that the two of you should come back into the office. Do you remember him suggesting that?
Well, not exactly. It was clear that Erik was not coming back into the office. He was leaving. But he did want me to come back in the office, and I was not hysterical and crying, and so I could have gone back up. I just told him that I needed to take care of Erik, and we could do it another time.
Did Dr. Oziel say anything to you about feeling threatened?
Yes.
And what did you say to him? Or did
I
you
don't
say
think I
anything?
said anything. I mean, I was rushing to get my brother, and at some point in there, he said that he did not feel comfortable with the way the session was ending, that he felt threatened. And he might have said it earlier too, actually. He said that I seemed menacing to him. And that he may have said, I feel threatened by the way you're acting. So he might have said it twice.
And Dr. Oziel testified that you said you weren't going to come back to the session, that you wanted to talk to your little brother, and that basically you just wanted to talk to your little brother before you decided whether or not you were going to talk to him anymore.
Right.
Did you say that?
Right.
Dr. Oziel said that you told him that you weren't sure that you wanted to talk to him anymore at all. And Dr. Oziel concluded that that was extremely menacing. Did you say you didn't want to talk to him anymore at all?
I said that I wasn't sure.
How would that be menacing?
That would have been earlier.
Dr. Oziel said that you shook his hand and said, "Good luck, Dr. Oziel." And he testified that he took that to be menacing and threatening also. Do you remember shaking his hand?
Again, I think it's in the hallway when I attempted to say goodbye to him before he followed me downstairs anyway. I may have said something like that, although I don't know what it was that he said that would have made me say good luck to him. I don't know if I said goodbye or what. So I don't know. I could have.
Dr. Oziel said that when he talked to you about having future sessions, that he told you he wanted to work on whatever it was that caused you and Erik to kill your parents. That's what he testified to here.
Right.
Right? And he said that you told him there wasn't anything to work on because what caused you to kill your parents wasn't here anymore, because they were both dead, meaning your parents. Do you remember saying that or something like that?
I may have said that.
What did you mean by it?
Well, that came because he was wanting to go farther than just figuring out why this happened and trying to, figure out the reasons for why he wanted to do actual more in-depth like therapy with me. And I felt very uncomfortable with him. I had felt uncomfortable with him in the past.
Just little reminder that anytime you do therapy with anyone, you should definitely feel comfortable with that person. So if you're feeling uncomfortable with the person that you are supposed to be disclosing all of the information that is deep within your heart and deep within your brain, and you're not comfortable with that person, it's probably best to find a new therapist. Just, obviously not legal advice, not any kind of advice really, other than general life advice. If you have red flags for any kind of reason, you might be dealing with Dr. Oziel. Maybe it's nothing, but regardless, you should be feeling comfortable with that person.
And I think he knew at that point that I was feeling very distrustful and uncomfortable with him. Although at that point, things were pretty good in the session. But still, I did not want to really work on like he wanted to, whatever it was that I was feeling, either before or after or because of what happened. And so I just tried to cut it off. And I made a statement that basically I don't want to work on anything with regards to me because he believed it was because of things my parents were doing or the dynamic, and the family was broken at that point, and my parents were dead. there was nothing, whatever had caused it in his mind was gone, was over with, whether it be the control or whatever. And so I'm pretty sure I remember saying something like that, although I don't think I used those words, but.
Dr. Oziel asked or testified that you told him that you thought your father would have been proud of you for killing him, that your father knew he should have been killed, and that your father would have been proud of the good job that you did. Do you remember having any discussion with him about whether your father would have been proud of you or not?
We had I wouldn't say it was a discussion, but I was saying that I thought my dad would be proud that my brother and I had stuck together afterwards and were very close. And that was one of the reasons that it concerned me that he went to Oziel instead of me, because I felt that we had stuck together and were very close, and was trying to get him into the same school I was going to and so on, live near each other. And I thought that Dad would be proud of that.
That is weird. That is weird. The idea that Jose would have been proud of them for sticking together. I mean, especially because of the fact that there were so many secrets that were kept between them. Like, it seems like Erik and Lyle were like really kept separated in a lot of ways, in so many ways. So, it's not like they were fostering an environment where they were like, you two should be super close. I don't know how I feel about that. Again, it could be grief talking. It could be him trying to self-soothe in some respect. By being like, maybe there's some silver lining to this that I could see. I'm not sure. But that is it's a little strange. I'm not gonna lie.
Did you say anything about your dad knew he should have been killed?
No.
Did you say anything about your dad would have been proud of the good job that you did?
No.
And to be clear, I'm not questioning whether Erik and Lyle actually were close. I'm not questioning whether or not they had, desires to be closer, because that seems pretty clear to me. But I'm saying whether or not their father would have been proud of that. That's the part that I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure that I buy into that point right there.
Dr. Oziel testified that you told them that you believed that your father would only continue to take more and more money, would only continue to make more and more money as time went on. Did you tell him that?
Yes.
And Dr. Oziel testified that you had suspected that there was another will which would have disinherited the two of you. Did you tell
Yes.
Dr. Oziel that? And he testified that there had been a file on the computer marked will, and that you had arranged to have it erased. Is that true? Did you tell him that?
Not really, not the way that it is there. I explained to him exactly what happened with the computer.
He's testified that you said you erased it so that that this was to erase the possibility of discovering a will that would have disinherited the two of you. Did you tell him that?
No, I didn't tell him that. And that couldn't be.
He testified that at one point, when he's talking about having the tapes, you expressed some concern in terms of strike that, if I may, Your Honor. Dr. Oziel tells you he has some tapes and that if something happens to him, those tapes are going to be released. Is that correct?
Right.
And Dr. Oziel testified that in response to that, you indicated that you were concerned about whether something would happen to him accidentally and the tapes would be erased.
Right.
Or would be
especially,
released. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
especially after he mentioned the hitman. You know, I told him, this doesn't sound like a great precaution because what happens if something happens to you and then just all this information is just released, and it could just be that you got into a car accident, or you mentioned the hitman and something about the hitman could have happened, or he could kill you or something, or there just seemed to be obviously anything that could happen in his life, because I guess they were going to be in the safety deposit box for his whole life, is what he was saying. So I was concerned about that. And
That's actually kind of an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, where he's like, well, what happens if the hitman kills you? And it's not my fault that you died, but now his information and my information gets released. Like, that's not cool. So that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought
Did you
about
make
it.
a joke about it, about protecting him? He said that you made a joke about if somebody broke into his house.
yes, I made a joke about it.
What was the joke?
Just that the way he had arranged it with the safety deposit box, it would be like I would almost have to be looking after him for his whole life. And if anything was about to happen to him, like if a burglar broke into his home, I'd have to be there to make sure that the burglar didn't do anything to him. Because otherwise, my brother's confession would go to the police.
Dr. Oziel testified that there was a discussion between you and your brother when you were there with him on November 2nd about how the family looked perfect, like the ideal family to the outside world. But in reality, it was a disastrously negative family, that the marriage between the two parents was a very terrible mother. Do you remember having a discussion like that?
It was a very terrible marriage.
Did you have a discussion like that with Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
He goes on to say that you and your brother talked about the mother and father had almost no relationship except the negative, and it was an emotionally abusive relationship with the father being the abuser. Did you and your brother talk about that in front of Dr. Oziel?
Right.
Dr. Oziel says that you told him that you had nothing but distance with respect to the father, and all you got was criticism, rejection, humiliation, and that you also didn't have a closer nurturing
Definitely
relationship
wrapping
with
up.
the mother.
You can feel it.
Did you and your brother have
I
that
know because of the
discussion in front of
timing, but-
Dr. Oziel?
This is definitely some
Right, that's
summation
Not
testimony.
exactly true, but we had that discussion, and that was definitely his view through this entire thing. And I was not. There were things that were not correct about it, but I didn't correct him.
What wasn't correct about it?
Well, there were lots of things, and certainly the change in the relationship between my mom and dad. I didn't mention to him and didn't explain why I felt that was happening. He saw my dad as the abuser and did not have a sense of who my mother was, and really the things that, she in her own way was very abusive to him, I felt, and meaning my father. And so I didn't get into my mother at all with him, because he felt she was suicidal, depressed, and it was like a mercy killing thing. So there were a lot of areas where he was really, it just wasn't correct, but we just stayed with what he felt pretty strongly about.
Dr. Oziel said that you talked about idolizing your father, but didn't use the word love with respect to him. Do you remember any discussions with regard to your father and idolizing him?
Yes. And I mean, I think he could get that sense since I admired my dad a great deal. And I definitely told him that I loved my father. And he was trying to explain to me why that was strange, but possible. And it's just not true that I didn't tell him that.
Dr. Oziel testified that in some ways the two of you were in awe of your father and saw him as a very powerful person because he'd been controlling you for much of your life. Did you and your brother say that?
Yes, that was part of the discussion. I would not have just said it like that, but it's pretty close.
Dr. Oziel testified that you told him that killing your father was a way of vindicating that you had a level of power than yourselves. And you said that, he said that that was your statement, that you'd expressed what happened as a way of vindicating yourselves, that you had a level of power, and that you'd finally gotten to the place where you did something perfectly. Did you ever tell him that?
No, but I do remember that.
What do you
That
remember?
he
about
mentioned that as a possible reason or thing that was going on.
it? Who mentioned it?
That Dr. Oziel said that there might be this, the control might have caused me to
Sorry, I had to
react in a way to
make Indy bigger.
free myself from the control and be sort of vindicated that I had my own power as a person or something like that. And he talked about that, but we never talked about it, about the perfect stuff.
So when he talked about this vindicating yourselves and having a level of power yourselves, when he suggested it, did you say, no, you're wrong, or I've never thought about that, or just agree, or what'd you do?
No, see, it wasn't like, it wasn't that I was just saying yes, 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 but I mean, I was mostly agreeing and I wasn't correcting a lot of things. But the way he says, he gives a long explanation, like using words like that, vindicating levels of power and stuff. It fits to some degree that there was power differences and the control. And so it was very easy to just agree with the things you were saying and discuss it.
And did you ever say that, did either of you ever say on that November 2nd session that you'd finally gotten to the place where you did something perfectly?
No,
Did you feel this had been the perfect crime?
no.
Dr. Oziel testified that he told you that he was going to collect all the mitigating details of your background and so that whatever happened down the road, if you got arrested, those mitigating details could be brought out. Do you remember him saying something like that?
Yes.
Did you think that he was talking about how the crime was committed, or what did you think he was talking about in terms of mitigating details?
Well, that was in the early part of the session when he was saying that he could be, in the event that we got arrested, he could be helpful in a trial to my attorney in piecing together the family constellation, which is basically what he said. And then, just helping explain the dynamic and the reasons as he saw it. He thought he was getting a very clear picture as to why it happened, even if we didn't know why. He felt he was getting a good picture and that he could help in a trial. And
So was it your understanding that this was going to be a collection of positive bits of information about you, or that he was going to be putting together things that would hurt you in a trial?
And positive things.
Dr. Oziel testified that that you had said you had been dating someone that you felt was a difficult person to date, and it was an accomplishment. And you said it was a Rose Festival queen and a billboard model. Dr. Oziel said these were two different women, and that your father had ridiculed and even made fun of these two women he was dating and called them both bimbos. Do you remember Dr. Oziel testifying to that?
Yes.
Did he call the billboard model a bimbo?
Yeah, who am I
Your
dating?
father. Did your
Yes.
father call the billboard model a bimbo?
Yes.
What about the Rose Queen?
No,
Yeah,
that
that's-
was the girlfriend. That was like his ideal.
I was gonna say that's the one that he
He
approved of.
picked her for me, and it didn't work out, but that's what he wanted.
So did you tell Dr. Oziel that your father had called the Rose Festival Queen a bimbo?
No, I wouldn't have told him that.
Did you
I
tell
told
him that your father picked her as a girlfriend
Yeah, I
for you?
was trying to explain the difference. And I did not say that dating Christy was an achievement. I would never have said that.
Christy being the billboard model?
Right.
So is Dr. Oziel wrong here when he says that you said that your father called the Rose Festival Queen a bimbo?
Yeah, he's wrong.
Did you just get it mixed up?
No, I mean, it sounds like he's just trying to make a point and using some of what I told him. But
Definitely sounds like we have a
certainly
picture as
doesn't-
to why Dr.
it's not
Oziel
possible that I
doesn't
told him
notes
that.
during the sessions.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Okay.
In a moment. Any examination on behalf of Erik Menendez?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you may approach. All right, there are a few matters that council want to
Okay.
discuss.
So they're going to discuss a few matters for Indy looks so silly. She's so relaxed. They're going to discuss a few matters and then they're going to have cross-examination. So episode 38 is going to be cross-examination of Lyle. That's going to be next Monday. Oh boy. Okay. So, at the top of the episode, I was like, what in the world are we going to be getting into? Of course, Dr. Oziel. That's what we were getting into. The bad penny that just keeps showing up throughout this trial. What a nightmare. Okay. Thank you so much to you guys for joining me. And before I sign out, there are still a couple questions here that I want to answer. Debbie Faison Cook said, Alita, did you do recap of videos on this? It will help when I do my Menendez episode because this is so much information. I started doing recap episodes like partway through the trial. I wasn't doing them from the very beginning. And also I have completely fallen behind on them in recent weeks. So unfortunately, there might be some gaps from those recaps for what might be helpful to you. I'm so sorry about that. AB Short Clip says, I don't understand the questioning sometimes. Lyle says he may have said that, and she follows up with, what did you mean by that? How can he explain something that he is unsure if he said it or not? I think that what he means when he says that is, I may have said that, as in like, yeah, I said that. I don't really want to admit to it or own up to it necessarily, but like, yeah, I said that. Sometimes when somebody says I may have said that, they're actually admitting to having said it. So I think that that's what they were getting at there. So yes. All right. That is it for me for today. Thank you to everybody who has been watching, whether you are lurking, whether you are in the chat, whether you are on replay. I appreciate all of you so much. Thanks to all of the members that I see in the chat here, and also to all of the mods that are helping to make sure that we are facilitating conversation that is, still healthy dialogue. Obviously, like I say, every time disagreement is always more than welcome. But we try to keep it respectful as much as possible. This is a case that not all people agree on. So it's always interesting to me to see what people are thinking about this case that doesn't agree with the way that I'm seeing this stuff. I may be a lawyer, but I'm also a human being. So, I can't speak for how different jurors are going to be seeing this. That's the beauty of having non-lawyers be watching this stuff and giving their impressions, is because you're standing in the role of what the jury might be thinking, what various jurors might be thinking throughout this trial. So I find it very, very, very fascinating. So thank you, everybody, for watching with us, joining us on this journey, and getting involved at various levels. I absolutely love it. Okay, all right. Well, this week we've got, for all the members, we've got members only live stream on Friday, the casual live stream, Friday 10 a.m. East Coast time, and for the also I've got a pre-recorded video that should be coming out within the next couple days. So it is on the whole Logan Paul, Nina Agdal, Dylan Dennis situation. If you've been following that on Twitter, you know that it's an absolute dumpster fire what's been going on with Dylan Dennis. He's scheduled to box against Logan Paul, and so he's been definitely targeting Nina Agdal since August 8th, when it was first announced that they would be having this fight. And so now she's suing him over a couple of his tweets, actually. Anyhow, keep your eyes peeled for that video for when it comes out. And that's all I have to say about that. That's the third movie quote for today. Thank you, Forrest Gump. Okay, guys. All right. I'm gonna check out now. Okay. All right, guys. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next video.